Hey everyone, and welcome to Slumber Reads. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. Sometimes I get comments asking if stories ever freak me out, and the answer is sometimes they do, and I think we have a couple of them in this video. If you do enjoy, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video helps out immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this roughly every 5 days. That's at least what I aim for. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is they do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. The name's Malachi, but almost everyone calls me Kai. From 2014 until the fall of 2019, I inspected underground mines. Most people hear mine inspector and picture someone wearing a hard hat while walking through tunnels with a clipboard. That's not entirely wrong, but it leaves out most of the job. I inspected active limestone mines, underground storage facilities, and old tunnels beneath properties where someone wanted to build a house, road, or commercial building. Sometimes I worked up to 1,000 feet underground. Other times, I crawled through openings barely wide enough for my shoulders because a farmer had discovered a hole in his pasture and wanted to know whether his cattle were going to disappear into it, or a wolf's den. My job was to identify unstable roof conditions, failed supports or beams, dangerous gases, flooding, and any evidence that the ground above might collapse. The equipment I carried consisted usually of a gas monitor, measuring tape, camera, marking paint, and a 20-ounce scaling hammer. The hammer was used to tap the roof and walls of a tunnel. Solid rocks usually produces a sharp, clean sound. Loose rock sounded hollow, and sometimes echoes. You learn to hear the difference quickly. You also learn that not every hollow sound came from loose rock, but we can chat about that later. I didn't grow up wanting to inspect mines. I grew up near Fredericktown. My father worked maintenance at a limestone quarry, and 2 of my uncles spent most of their adult lives in the lead belt. Underground work was just something people did. My father hated that I followed him into it. He didn't expect me to be a doctor, but he sure didn't want me working the mines. He once told me, "The ground didn't care whether you were a good person, whether you had children, or whether someone was waiting for you at home. It only has to make one mistake," he said. "You have to be correct every day." At the time, I thought he was talking about cave-ins. Now, though, I'm not so sure. I began working for a private geological company in June 2014, close to the silver mine that you can find in between Ironton and Junction City. We contracted with mine operators, insurance companies, and property owners. I was 25 at the time, recently married and convinced that my associate's degree made me smarter than the others who had spent 30 years underground. It took about 3 weeks for that attitude to fade. My first supervisor was a man named Dale. Dale was 58 when I met him. He had a gray mustache, a permanent limp, and hands that looked like they had been carved from old wood. He had worked in mines since the late 70s. A no-nonsense kind of guy. He didn't tell ghost stories. That was important. Most miners did. They talked about Tommyknockers, moving lights, and dead men tapping from behind the walls. Most of it was something to pass the time. Dale never participated. If someone mentioned hearing voices in an empty heading, he blamed the ventilation. I'll try and explain terms that I'll be using. A heading in a mine refers to a tunnel that's been driven through to reach a mineral deposit. It allows miners to access ore and set up further workings. If someone saw a light where no light should have been, he called it a reflection. If equipment moved by itself, he said someone had forgotten where they left it. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. The first strange thing happened less than a month after I started, July 2014. We were inspecting an abandoned limestone mine. a small town called Edina. The mine had closed sometime in the early 90s, and a company was considering using part of it for underground document storage. Old limestone mines are often shaped like enormous grids. The miners remove sections of rock while leaving large pillars behind to support the roof. Some chambers are wide enough to drive several trucks side by side. The mine was dry, stable, and boring. That was exactly what we wanted. That was our favorite. Dale and I had been underground for about 2 hours when we reached the northern end. According to the map, the workings ended at a solid wall of limestone. Dale marked our location while I checked the roof. I struck it with my hammer. Sharp. Solid. I struck the wall a second time. Sharp. I moved a few feet to the right and struck it a third time. 3 knocks answered from the other side. I lowered my hammer. Dale looked up from the map. What? Did you hear that? Hear what? I hit the wall again. 3 strikes. We waited. 3 knocks came back. They were evenly spaced. Dale walked over and put his palm against the limestone. Probably another heading behind it, I said. No way. He checked the map. There's nothing behind this wall but 60 feet of rock. I hit the wall once. 1 knock answered. Twice. 2 knocks. I smiled nervously. Somebody's screwing with us. Dale grabbed the hammer from my hand impatiently. He hit the wall 5 times in an uneven pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. The answer came immediately. It repeated the exact pattern. Dale didn't smile. He handed the hammer back to me. We're done with this section. What do you think it is? Water. That doesn't sound like water. Then it's rock. He started walking away. I followed. As we reached the next intersection, 5 more knocks came from somewhere behind us. The same pattern. Dale never mentioned it again. I did tell my father, though. He listened quietly, and then asked where the mine was located. When I told him, he said, "Don't knock on things if you ain't know what's knocking back." I laughed. He didn't. His eyes seemed to pierce through me as my laugh faded. During my first year, I heard plenty of sounds that seemed strange until someone explained them. Water running through fractures could sound like whispering. The kind that you don't understand but doesn't freak you out either. Air moving through a borehole could whistle like a person calling from far away. A borehole is a hole drilled in the earth that helps allow mineral resource extraction. The roof sometimes cracked with a noise like a gunshot. Metal pipes grew and contracted. Loose stone slid across the floor even when no one touched it. Underground, sound didn't behave the way it did on the top. It traveled through rock, disappeared into open chambers, and returned from directions that made no sense, even to an experienced miner. That was what I told myself about the knocking. In February 2015, Dale and I were sent to an old lead mine in St. Francois County, somewhere close to Farmington. The mine had been closed for years, decades. A landowner had discovered water flowing from an old drainage tunnel and was worried that the workings extended beneath his property. Collapses are often the culprit. We entered through a horizontal opening cut into the side of a hill. The tunnel was narrower compared to the limestone mines I had been inside. Timber supports lined portions of the passage, although most of them had rotted or collapsed. The air smelled like wet clay and rust. We were only supposed to travel about 800 feet before reaching a flooded section. At 600 feet, we found fresh boot prints. The prints were deep and sharply defined in the mud, as if they were just created. Someone had walked farther into the mine. No prints came back out. Dale crouched beside them to get a better look. Could be the property owner, I said. He said he's ain't never been inside. Kids? Maybe. We followed the tracks deeper. They were made by an old-style work boot with a wide heel. The person had taken unusually long steps, as if they'd been running. The prints continued until the tunnel ended at a pool of black water. They went directly into it. I shined my light across the surface. The water filled the passage from wall to wall. "Maybe there's a ledge," I said. Dale shook his head. The old mind map showed that the tunnel dropped nearly 30 feet beyond that point. Anyone who walked into the water would have disappeared almost immediately. We called the landowner and asked whether anyone was missing in the towns. No one was reported to have been missing to his recollection. The sheriff's department sent 2 deputies and a dive team. They found no body. They also found no footprints near the entrance except ours. According to them, the tracks began nearly 500 feet inside the mine. The official explanation was that they were old prints preserved by the stable conditions underground. That was possible. What wasn't possible were the prints were filling slowly with water while we watched. Later that year, I started hearing the footsteps. They didn't happen in every mine I was in. They usually occurred in old mines where the air was still and there was no active equipment. I would be walking with Dale or another inspector and hear someone behind us. A slow, dragging step. Another step. If we stopped, it stopped. If we continued, it followed. Whenever I turned around, the tunnel was empty. The first few times I assumed it was an echo. Then, during an inspection near Joplin, I heard the footsteps while standing still. This was a first. Dale and I had stopped to examine a fractured support pillar. Something approached from the darkness behind us. Step, drag, step, drag. It was moving slowly, but it was definitely getting closer. Dale stared through me. "Keep your light forward," he said. "Why?" "Just do it." The footsteps continued. Step, drag, step, drag. Small stones slid behind us. I felt the muscles in my back tighten like a torqued screw. "Is someone there?" I yelled. The footsteps stopped. Dale closed his eyes. From the darkness, my own voice answered, "Is someone there?" It sounded far away, but it was undoubtedly me. The words echoed through the tunnel. Then the footsteps began moving again. Faster this time. Dale grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the exit. We didn't run, because running underground is how people trip. Crack skulls or fall into holes they didn't see. Mines are notoriously dark. But we walked as swiftly as we could. The footsteps followed for nearly 10 minutes. When we reached daylight, Dale made me stay outside while he stood at the entrance. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Listening." "For what?" He didn't answer. After several minutes, he stepped away from the opening. On the drive back, he spoke up. "Never answer something underground unless you want to see who you're talking to." "That was an echo." "No." "You think somebody was following us?" "No." "Then what was it?" Dale looked through the windshield. "I don't know." That was the first time I ever heard him admit that. My wife noticed changes in me before I did. Her name was Kelsey. We had been married for just over 2 years when she told me I had started talking in my sleep. I asked what I said during my dreams. "You count," she replied. "Count what?" "I don't know. You get to 50 or 60 and start over." I laughed and told her it was probably because I spent all day measuring tunnels. A few weeks later, she woke me by turning on the bedroom light. I was standing beside the wall with one hand pressed against it. "What are you doing?" she asked. I had no idea. The wall separated our bedroom from the hallway. I told her I must have been sleepwalking. She stared at my hand. My knuckles were bleeding. There were 3 small dents in the drywall. In 2016, our company received a contract to document abandoned workings beneath a property in the Ozarks. The landowner planned to build cabins near an old mine opening. Nobody knew exactly what had been mined there. Some records described it as an iron prospect. Others called it a lead exploration tunnel. We relied on rumors. The main passage extended straight into a ridge. It was barely 6 feet high and wide enough for one person at a time. Dale stayed outside because his bad knee had been bothering him. I entered with another inspector named Ryan. Ryan was younger than me and had worked for the company for about 6 months. About 400 feet inside, we found a side tunnel that wasn't shown on any of the available maps. It had been sealed with stacked rocks. The wall had partially collapsed, leaving an opening near the top. Cold air flowed through the gap. Ryan shined his light inside. Looks open to me. We're not supposed to enter undocumented areas. We're supposed to document them. He had a point, although I didn't like it. We removed several loose rocks and widened the opening. The tunnel beyond was different from the rest of the mine. The main passage had been drilled and blasted. This means that the drill rigs drilled the walls and then blasted with explosives. They were irregular and scarred with tool marks. The hidden tunnel had smooth walls. Not perfectly smooth, but rounded, almost polished. The floor sloped downward. We crawled through. After about 50 feet, the passage widened into a circular chamber. In the center stood an iron chair. That's the best way I can describe it. It looked handmade. Thick metal plates had been welded together to form a seat. Back and 4 short legs. Leather straps hung from the armrests. Ryan laughed nervously. What the hell? I took several photographs. We would normally take pictures for a few reasons. One is for safety and training. The second is for documentation and progress tracking. There were scratches on the floor around the chair, like someone had dragged it repeatedly across the chamber. The walls were covered in names. Some were carved deeply into the rock, others appeared to have been written in charcoal. Most were too faded to read. Not all of them. Ryan walked around the chair. Don't touch it, I said. I'm not. He leaned closer. There's something underneath. Bolted to the bottom of the seat was a metal plate. Ryan read it aloud. Malachi. I thought he was joking. What? He pointed. My full first name had been engraved into the metal. Not Kai. Malachi. The spelling was correct. People usually spelt it as M-A-L-A-C-H-I, whereas I spell it with I-C-H-I. My mother had used an I because she liked the way it looked. Ryan knew me only as Kai. Did Dale put you up to this? I asked. Ryan stepped away. I didn't do that. I crouched beside the chair. Below my name was a date. September 19th, 2019. At the time, that was more than 3 years away. I took a photograph. The camera flashed. Something moved in the tunnel behind us. A shadow crossed the opening. Ryan turned. Dale? No one answered. Our radios produced only static. Then a man began humming somewhere deeper inside the mine. It was a song my dad used to sing while working on cars. I hadn't heard it since I was a kid. I stood so fast that I hit my head on the low ceiling. Time to go. Ryan didn't argue. We climbed through the opening and replaced the rocks. When we reached the entrance, Dale was sitting on the hood of the truck. He asked why we had been underground for almost 4 hours. I checked my watch. We had entered the hidden tunnel at 10:16 a.m. It was now after 2 p.m. It had felt like 15 minutes. I showed Dale the photographs. The chamber was visible. The chair was visible, but the metal plate beneath it was blank. My name and the date had disappeared. We returned the following morning with the property owner. The side tunnel was no longer there. The wall where we had originally found, it was solid stone. No stacked rocks. Solid on broken rock. Ryan quit 2 weeks later. He never told me why, but I had my suspicions. I tried contacting him several years ago, but his phone number had been disconnected. I couldn't find him online. According to one of our former co-workers, Ryan's family claimed he had never worked in mining. They said he had been a school teacher. I still have photographs of him wearing our company uniform. At least, I did. When I checked recently, he was missing from most of them. There were empty spaces where he had been standing, but the gaps were noticeable. Around 2017, I had become a senior field inspector. The promotion came with better pay, a company truck, and the responsibility of training new inspectors. I stopped talking about the eerie things. I learned that from Dale. I didn't mention the footsteps. I didn't tell anyone about the chair. I didn't explain why I refused to enter a mine alone. The job was dangerous enough without people thinking I was unstable. Most inspections remained completely normal. I saw roof collapses, flooded mine shafts, and equipment abandoned so long that tree roots had grown through it. I found animal bones, rusted tools, and old lunch tins. Once I found a newspaper from 1951 that looked as like it had been left there the day before. Another time, we discovered an underground room containing hundreds of glass jars filled with a cloudy and peculiar liquid. We notified the police and left them alone. They turned out to be homemade mineral samples. There was mostly an explanation. Mostly. In August 2017, we inspected a working limestone mine outside a small town in central MO near Branch. That just means the mine operated during the day. Our inspection began after the workers had left, because management wanted us to examine an area near active blasting. There were 4 of us. Me, Dale, a structural engineer named Allison, and a safety technician named Mark. Allison was 32, smart and impatient. She had no time for stories about haunted mines. Mark was nearing retirement and had worked underground almost as long as Dale. We entered shortly after 7 p.m. The mine had electrical lighting in the main corridors for the workers, but the section we were inspecting was dark. At around 10 p.m., Allison stopped. "Who's the 5th person?" she asked. We turned. No one was behind us. "What do you mean?" "I keep seeing another light down the hatch." Mark glanced at Dale. "Where?" "Behind Kai." I looked over my shoulder. The tunnel was empty. Allison pointed farther back. "There." For a split second I saw it. A small yellow light floating near the floor. It looked like an old carbide lamp. Carbide lamps haven't been common in decades. They were the type of flashlight that had a giant lens that looked like an old camera flash. The light moved behind a support pillar. Dale raised his radio. "Control, can you confirm all personnel are accounted for?" The answer came through clearly. "All personnel accounted for. 4-person inspection team underground." Allison walked toward the pillar. Dale blocked her. "Don't follow it." She looked annoyed. "Someone could be down here." "No one's down here." "Then what did we see?" "A reflection." "From what?" Dale didn't answer. The yellow light appeared again 2 pillars farther away. It was moving against us, deeper into the mine. Mark counted aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. "What are you doing?" Allison asked. "Confirming." We continued working. Every 20 or 30 minutes, the light would glow behind us. It never came closer. It just followed. Before leaving the mine, we stopped for a group photograph near the mine entrance. Management wanted it for a safety presentation. A superior took the picture. The next morning, Allison emailed it to us. There were 5 people standing together. The 5th man was behind me. He wore dirty coveralls and an old metal helmet. Coveralls are different from overalls. They are a one-piece type of clothing that covers the entire body. They help protect the harsh environments of the mine. His face was hidden because he was looking downward. One hand rested on my shoulder. I hadn't felt it. Allison called my cell phone. "Who is that?" I could sense her frustration growing. "I don't know." "Mark says there were only 4 of us." "There were." "Dale won't answer his phone." This isn't surprising. I printed the photograph and took it to Dale's house. He studied it from his kitchen table. After a while, he opened a drawer and removed another photograph. It showed a group of miners standing outside a tunnel entrance. The photograph was dated 1978. A younger version of Dale stood near the center. Behind him was the same man, same helmet, same coveralls, same downward tilted head. His hand rested on Dale's shoulder. "We called him the Counter," Dale said. "Why?" "Because he shows up when there's one more person underground than there should be." "What does that mean?" "It means somebody doesn't come back." I looked at the old photograph. "Who didn't come back?" Dale pointed toward a young man standing beside him. "My brother." I had worked with Dale for 3 years, and he never mentioned he had a brother. "He disappeared underground?" "Roof collapse. We never recovered his body." What does this have to do with the photograph?" "We saw the extra light for 3 nights before the accident happened." I looked again at the picture from our inspection. The man's hand was on my shoulder. "Are you saying I'm going to die?" "No." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm just saying don't be the last person out." For the next 2 years, I never was. Not a chance. When entering a mine, I made someone go ahead of me. When leaving, I stayed in the middle of the group. I knew it was an irrational fear, but I did it anyway. My marriage ended during that period. Kelsey said I had become distant, different. She mentioned I woke her at night by walking around the house with a flashlight. I checked closets, the basement, and the space beneath our porch. Sometimes I would count the rooms in my sleep. Sometimes I stood in doorways and listened. I don't remember doing any of it. One morning she found me in the basement tapping the concrete foundation with a hammer. She asked what I was doing. I told her there was a hollow space behind the wall. There wasn't. At least, there shouldn't have been. Kelsey moved out in January 2018. I don't blame her. After she left, I began volunteering for more inspections. Idle hands is the devil's workshop, my grandmother used to say. Being underground was easier than being home. The mind stayed busier that way. This probably sounds strange considering everything I've described, but underground, I knew why I was afraid. On the top, I heard the footsteps everywhere. In store aisles, parking garages, the hallway outside my apartment. Step, drag, step, drag. Whenever I turned around, no one was ever there. In May 2018, Dale retired. I knew I was alone for real this time. There was no ceremony. He cleared his desk on a Friday afternoon and left his hard hat hanging on the wall. Before he went, he gave me a scaling hammer. It was old with a leather-wrapped handle, worn smooth by decades of use. "You'll need this more than I will," he said. I asked him why he had decided to retire. He looked toward the empty hallway outside the office. I started hearing my brother. "Underground?" "No." He left before I could ask anything else. Our final project together had been inspection of an abandoned mine called Black Hollow. That wasn't its official name, but every local called it Black Hollow. The mine was located on private land. A logging company had discovered several sinkholes near an access road and wanted to know whether the old workings were collapsing. Very little documentation existed. This is pretty normal. The mine appeared briefly on a state map from the 1920s and vanished from later records. We entered through a partially collapsed drift near the bottom of a ravine. A drift is where the entry is horizontal and usually accesses the minerals directly instead of having to walk the whole time. The passage continued straight for nearly 2,500 feet. That part was unusual. Exploration mines normally led toward promising mineral deposits. Black Hollow had been driven directly beneath the ridge without any obvious effort to follow one. The tunnel walls were covered in small square recesses. Each was about 5 inches deep. Some contained rusted nails and bolt anchors. Others contained scraps of cloth, animal teeth, or small bundles of hair tied with string. I photographed everything. Dale didn't. He walked with his eyes fixed on the floor. "What were these for?" I asked. "Not sure." "You've been here before?" He stopped. "How do you know that? You recognized the entrance." Dale looked back the way we had come. "I was here once." "When?" 1978. "With your brother?" He nodded. "What happened?" "We entered through a different opening." "There's only one entrance, though." "There was another back then." The tunnel ended at a vertical shaft. We couldn't see the bottom. Cold air rose from it, carrying the smell of soil after rain. There was a steel ladder attached to the wall. It looked new. The bolts showed no rust. "Did your former crew install that?" I asked. "No." I shined my light down the shaft. 150 meters. The ladder continued beyond the reach of the beam. Something climbed beneath us. The rungs vibrated. A faint metallic ringing echoed from below. I stepped away from the edge. Who else is down here? No one. The climbing continued, slow and steady. Dale lifted his hammer. The top of a helmet appeared in the darkness. It was an old metal mining helmet, the same kind worn by the man in the photographs. Dale grabbed my jacket. We ran. Behind us, something pulled itself out of the shaft. I heard metal scrape against stone. Then the footsteps followed. Step, drag, step, drag. As we neared the entrance, Dale began shouting his brother's name. "Eddie!" The footsteps stopped immediately. A man answered from deep inside the mine. "Dale?" The voice echoed what seemed like an hour. Dale turned. I grabbed him. "That isn't your brother." "Dale?" The voice called again. "I found the way out." Dale wrestled with me. It took everything I had to keep him moving. We reached daylight. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Dale looked at me and said, "Don't ever go back in there." I promised I wouldn't. In September 2019, I broke that promise. The logging company had begun clearing land above Black Hollow. A section of access road collapsed, leaving a hole almost 30 feet across. Our company was asked to determine whether the rest of the road was safe. I refused the assignment. My manager reminded me that I was the senior inspector and the only current employee who had entered the mine previously. I told him to find someone else. He said the company would lose the contract. I still refused. The next morning, Allison called me. I hadn't worked with her since the mine where we saw the fifth light. She had been hired as the project engineer for the job. "I heard you're afraid of this one," she said. "I'm not afraid." "Then what's the problem?" "The mine is unstable. That's why we inspect it." "You don't understand." "Then explain it." I tried. I told her about the shaft, the old helmet, the voice that sounded like Dale's brother. Allison listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You know Dale had early-stage dementia when he retired." I didn't know that, nor believed it. He was confusing places and dates. He probably told you stories that weren't accurate. I listened. I heard the voice. Sound travels underground. I saw someone climbing the ladder. You saw a helmet. You were there when we saw the fifth light. I saw a reflection. What about the photograph? Digital artifacts happen. I almost laughed. Why did you call me? Because I trust your judgment underground, even if I don't trust your explanation. She said the inspection team would include 4 people. Myself and Allison, a safety technician named Rob, and a local surveyor named Thomas. I had heard about Thomas before. Thomas was nearly 60 and had worked around mines his entire life. He knew nothing about my previous inspection. We entered Black Hollow on September 19th, 2019. The date engraved beneath the iron chair. I considered backing out when I realized it. I didn't. That decision has bothered me more than any other in my entire life. The mine looked exactly as I remembered. Same narrow passage, same square recesses in the walls, same bundles of hair. Thomas stopped repeatedly to examine them. Memorial holes, he said. Memorial holes were created to commemorate a significant person, event, or loss. What does that mean? Allison asked. Some old mining communities place personnel items underground after a death. I've never heard of that. Neither have I. He smiled, but no one else did. We placed monitoring equipment near the entrance and continued inward. At roughly 300 feet, Rob noticed boot prints in the dust. 4 different sets. They traveled toward us. What time did the survey crew leave? He asked. There was no survey crew underground, Allison said. Thomas crouched by the tracks. These are fresh. The 4 sets of prints matched our boots. I placed mine beside one. Same size, same tread pattern. The right heel even had the same missing section where a piece of rubber had torn away. The tracks belonged to us. They had been made before we arrived. They continued deeper into the mine. Allison tried to explain them as prints from our previous inspection. I reminded her that she hadn't been there, and I had worn different boots at the time. We followed the tracks. They led to the vertical shaft. The steel ladder was no longer there. A narrow bridge of rocks crossed the opening. The footprints continued over it. I don't remember that being here, I said as I thought back to that night. Allison looked at the map I had drawn in 2018. The tunnel ended at the shaft. Absolutely. Thomas tested the stone bridge with his hammer. Seems to be solid. He stepped onto it slowly. I began to grab his shoulder. We don't know what's on the other side. That's why we're here. Thomas crossed. Rob followed him. Allison went third. I stood alone at the edge trying to gather my thoughts. From the shaft, my own voice disappeared. Don't be the last person. I crossed swiftly. The passage continued beyond the shaft. The walls became more polished as we traveled. Eventually, the tool marks disappeared completely. The tunnel wasn't natural, but it didn't look mined either. It looked worn out, almost as if something gigantic moved through it back and forth for a very long time. The boot prints remained ahead of us, guiding us. After another 100 feet, we found a yellow survey mark painted on the wall. It was still wet. Thomas touched it. That's my paint, he exclaimed. He double-checked the spray can that was on his belt. The cap was still sealed. Farther ahead, we found another marker. Then another. Each had been placed exactly where Thomas normally marked survey stations. The final mark read, End of inspection. Below it included 4 vertical lines. Someone had crossed out the 4th. Rob turned towards me. You've been here before. No. Then who made these? I didn't answer. Allison raised her radio. The signal was filled with static. Then her own voice came through. Station 7 is stable. Moving to Station 8. Allison looked down at the radio. She hadn't transmitted anything. A second voice followed. Rob's. I can hear something ahead. Then came the warning. Kai, don't let it count us. Thomas whispered. What the hell? The radio crackled again. My voice came through last. Leave Allison. She stared at me. What does that mean? I don't know. From farther down the tunnel, someone began screaming. It sounded like Allison. She was standing beside me. The scream came again. Help me. Allison lifted her light. That's not possible. The voice called my name. Kai? I grabbed Allison's arm before she could move. The light appeared ahead of us. A yellow carbide flame floated in the darkness. Behind it stood 4 people. An inspection team. They were about 150 feet away, partly hidden by the curve of the tunnel. One wore a white hard hat like Allison. One carried a survey pole like Thomas. One had Rob's orange reflective vest. The 4th wore my jacket. They were facing away from us. Rob whispered, That's us. The other team began walking. Their lights moved farther into the tunnel. Thomas raised his camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the passage like a bolt of lightning. For that 1/10 of a second, the figures weren't facing away anymore. They were facing towards us. Their heads were lowered like the previous photos I saw. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew. The figure wearing my jacket had one hand resting on Allison's shoulder, the same way the counter had touched mine. I remembered Dale's warning begin speaking in my head. Somebody doesn't come back. We're leaving, I said. No one argued. We turned around. However, the stone bridge over the shaft was gone. The passage ended at the open pit. Allison looked at her map. There's gotta be another route. There isn't. Rob shined his light across the shaft. The opposite side was 20 feet away. Too far to jump. We crossed here, Thomas said. I know. The radio crackled. Dale's voice came through. Kai? I froze. Dale had retired more than a year earlier. Kai, I found a ladder. A light disappeared below us. Then another, then dozens. Small yellow flames moved in the shaft like people climbing an invisible staircase. The metallic ringing began, coming toward us. Allison grabbed my sleeve. What do we do? I looked along the edge of the shaft. There was a narrow ledge on the right side. It might have been wide enough to cross if we pressed ourselves against the wall. Rob went first. Thomas followed. I told Allison to go next. She shook her head. You gotta go first. Something struck the wall beneath us. Dust began falling from the ceiling. The yellow lights grew larger. Allison stepped onto the ledge. Halfway across, she stopped. Kai? What? She was staring into the shaft. There's someone down there. Keep moving. It's me. A woman stood far below us. She wore Allison's white hard hat. Her face was turned upward. Kai? The woman called. The voice came from both the shaft and the Allison beside me. The woman below lifted one arm. She was holding Dale's scaling hammer. The hammer Dale gave me during his retirement, the one attached to my belt. I touched it to make sure it was still there. It was. The Allison on the ledge stared back at me. What is she holding? Don't look at her. The woman below began climbing the wall. She didn't use a ladder. Her hands and feet pressed flat against the stone as she crawled upward. Allison screamed and hurried across. I followed her. The ledge crumbled beneath my final step. Rob caught my arm and pulled me onto the other side. We ran toward the entrance. The footsteps followed. Not one set, 4. Step, drag, step, drag. The radios played different fragments of conversations. Some were things we had said earlier. Others hadn't happened yet. I heard Rob crying. Thomas was praying. Allison saying she couldn't find her face. Then my voice said, "We left the wrong one." The footsteps moved closer. At the memorial holes, Thomas suddenly stopped. "What are you doing?" I shouted. He pointed. Inside was a wallet. His wallet. He removed the one from his pocket. Both were identical. He opened the wallet from the wall. Inside was his driver's license. The photograph showed Thomas wearing the old metal mining helmet. A folded note was tucked behind it. Thomas read the note slowly. His face went pale, eyes glazed over. "What does it say?" Allison asked. He handed it to me. The note was written in my own handwriting. Thomas did not enter with us. I looked at Thomas. He backed away. "What is that supposed to mean?" I counted. Rob, Allison, Thomas, me. 4 people. Then I remembered when we arrived. Thomas was waiting at the site when I arrived. Allison had introduced him. Rob had shaken his hand. I had watched him put on his equipment. He had entered with us. Hadn't he? The footsteps stopped. A man spoke behind us. 3 came in. It was Dale's voice. Thomas stared into the darkness. "That isn't true." 3 came in. The voice repeated. Allison began counting. Kai, Rob, me. She looked at Thomas. Her expression changed. "Who are you?" Thomas's face collapsed. Not physically, emotionally. He looked like a child who had been abandoned. "You know me." "No," Allison said. "I don't." Rob raised his light. "Where did he come from?" Thomas grabbed my arm. "Kai, you talked to me outside." I remembered it. We had been discussing his survey equipment. He had told me about his first mining job near Viburnum. I remembered everything, but the memories had started feeling borrowed. Almost as if the stories had been told to me rather than things I had experienced. Thomas looked toward the mine entrance. Daylight was visible in the distance. He ran. The footsteps resumed. They ran with him. Thomas disappeared around the curve. We followed. When we reached the entrance, Thomas was gone. There was no sign of him outside the mine. No vehicle, no equipment, no boot prints. We called the sheriff's department right away. They searched the mine for 2 days. They found nothing. The company that hired our team denied employing a surveyor named Thomas. Allison had no memory of him. Neither did Rob. The photographs from the inspection only showed 3 people. Me, Allison, Rob. In the photograph Thomas took of the figures ahead of us, 4 inspectors stood in the tunnel. 1 was me, 1 was Rob, 1 was Allison. The 4th wore an old metal helmet and looked toward the ground. His hand rested on Allison's shoulder. I resigned the following Monday. My manager offered me a leave of absence. 5 years was a long time in this current market. I told him I was finished. He asked whether my decision had anything to do with the Black Hollow inspection. I asked how many people had been on our team. He said 3. I haven't entered a mine since September 19th, 2019. For the past few months, my daughter has left me a voice message almost every night on a little yellow M&M recorder. It is a cheap plastic toy, about 8 inches tall. Yellow body, white gloves, white shoes. The usual permanently worried expression. You press one eyebrow to record, and the other to play the message back. The sound quality is awful. Everything comes through beneath a layer of static, as though the person speaking is calling from somewhere very far away. It can only store one short recording at a time. Whenever a new message is made, the previous one disappears. My daughter, Zelda, is 7. Her messages are usually the last thing I hear before going to bed. I work in investment banking, and my firm is currently advising on a merger that has swallowed most of my waking life. I cannot give details, even anonymously, but it is the kind of deal that produces 12-hour conference calls, emergency revisions at 9:30 p.m., and senior people suddenly deciding that a presentation everyone approved 3 days earlier needs to be rebuilt before morning. For most of the last few months, I've been getting home between 10 and midnight from Monday through Thursday. My wife, Frances, handles the evenings when that happens. She picks Zelda up from school, makes dinner, checks her homework, and gets her into bed. By the time I arrive, the house is dark and both of them are usually asleep. The yellow M&M waits for me on the kitchen counter. I press its right eyebrow, and Zelda tells me about her day. "Hi, Daddy. I got 9 out of 10 on my spelling test, but the one I got wrong was because Mrs. Jacobs didn't understand my E. Mom says you're not allowed to give me chocolate before school anymore. Daddy, today I saw a dog that looked exactly like Grandma. Sometimes she sings. Sometimes she whispers because she is supposed to be sleeping. Once she spent the entire recording describing a rock she had found near the school parking lot. I usually record something back. Nothing elaborate. I'm proud of you. Your E does look weird. Please don't tell Grandma about the dog." In the morning, my reply is gone. By the time I return from work, there is a new message waiting. It became one of those small domestic routines that forms without anybody formally acknowledging it. The M&M was simply part of the kitchen now, standing between the microwave and the container where Frances kept coffee capsules. I cannot tell you exactly when the messages began to change. The first one I remember was on a Tuesday. I arrived home at 11:17 p.m. Frances had left pasta in the refrigerator, and a note asking me not to wake her because she had an early morning. The M&M stood beside the microwave. I loosened my tie, opened the refrigerator, and pressed play while looking for the pasta. Static crackled through the little speaker. Then Zelda's voice began. "Hi, Daddy. I finished my book today. It was about a girl who finds a secret door, but Mom said I shouldn't tell you the ending because maybe you want to read it." She giggled. "Good night. I love you." There was a pause. Normally, the recorder made a tiny mechanical click as soon as the message ended. That night, it kept running. 4 seconds passed. Maybe 5. Then Zelda whispered, "Don't play it again." The recorder clicked off. I stood there with one hand inside the refrigerator. It did not frighten me. Not yet. Zelda had recently discovered that saying vaguely ominous things was an effective way to bother adults. A week earlier, she had looked at Frances during breakfast and said, "You shouldn't wear those shoes today." When Frances asked why, Zelda had shrugged and said, "You'll find out." Nothing happened. She had simply wanted to see whether her mother would change shoes. I assumed the message was another attempt to be creepy, so I pressed play again. "Hi, Daddy. I finished my book today. It was about a girl who finds a secret door, but Mom said I shouldn't tell you the ending because maybe you want to read it." The giggle. "Good night. I love you." Static. Then I said don't. Click. I stared at the toy. The words had changed. I played the message a third time. This time it ended immediately after "I love you." No warning, no second sentence, just the click. I checked the back of the toy for a loose battery compartment. One corner was held together with clear tape, but nothing looked broken. I ate, standing at the corner, and took the M&M upstairs with me. Then I felt ridiculous and brought it back down. For the next 2 nights, the messages were normal. On Wednesday, Zelda told me about a drawing she had made at school. On Thursday, she sang most of "You're Welcome" from Moana, before Frances shouted from somewhere in the background that she needed to brush her teeth. Friday evening, I made it home before dinner. The yellow M&M was already on the counter, but I did not touch it. There was no reason to. Zelda was awake. Frances was cooking, and for once I could hear about their day without the help of a plastic piece of candy. We ate together. Zelda told me about a girl in her class who had cried because somebody broke her pencil. Frances complained about a client who used the phrase, "circle back," 11 times in one morning. The M&M remained beside the microwave all evening. I noticed it several times. I cannot explain why I never asked about the strange message. Maybe I did not want to turn a harmless joke into a thing. Maybe some part of me already suspected that Zelda would not know what I was talking about. On Monday, I got home at 10:46 p.m. The downstairs lights were off except for the one above the stove. The M&M was directly beneath it. I pressed play. "Hi, Daddy. We went to Grandma's after school, and she gave me a bracelet, but Mom says I can't wear it to school because I'll lose it." Zelda lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I won't lose it." Then louder, "Good night. Love you." Static followed. A breath came through the speaker. It did not sound like a child breathing. It was too slow, too deliberate. Then Zelda's voice said, "You keep making this take longer." I did not replay it. I set the toy down and checked the front door. Locked. The back door was locked too. I went upstairs and looked into Zelda's room. Her nightlight projected stars across the ceiling. She was asleep on her stomach with one arm hanging over the side of the bed. Frances was awake in our room, scrolling through her phone. "Did Zelda seem strange tonight?" I asked. Frances looked up. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Was she trying to scare me about something?" "Not that I noticed." "Did you hear her recording tonight?" Frances shook her head. "I was cleaning up after dinner." She watched me for a moment. "What happened?" I almost told her. Instead, I said, "Nothing. I think she's playing a joke." Frances smiled. "You're being psychologically defeated by a 7-year-old. That was exactly what I wanted to believe. The following night, Zelda's message was about the bracelet. She had lost it at school. Frances had been right, which Zelda seemed deeply offended by. "Mom keeps saying she told me so," she complained. "She only said it like 100 times, so it doesn't count." Then, "Good night, Daddy. I love you." Static. A different voice spoke. It was still Zelda's voice, but older. Not dramatically older. There was no movie monster growl or artificial distortion. It sounded like a girl of 15 or 16. The same slight whistle on certain S sounds. The same rhythm. The same habit of dragging out the final word in a sentence. "She still thinks I'm her." The recording ended. I played it again. Zelda complained about Frances. Zelda said goodnight. Then the older voice repeated, "She still thinks I'm her." I listened a third time. Same thing. On the fourth replay, the sentence changed. "She still thinks I'm Zelda." I dropped the toy. It struck the edge of the counter and landed on the floor. The impact triggered the playback button. Zelda's message began again from beneath the kitchen table. I crouched but did not pick it up. "Hi, Daddy. I lost my bracelet today." The yellow M&M lay on its back, smiling at the ceiling. "Good night, Daddy. I love you." Static. Then the older voice whispered, "Only you can hear me." I left it on the floor. The next morning it was back on the kitchen counter. I asked Frances whether she had picked it up. She was packing Zelda's lunch. "Picked what up?" "The thing that fell under the table." She glanced toward the counter. "Oh, No, I didn't notice it. Zelda came into the kitchen carrying one shoe. Francis immediately started asking where the other one was. The conversation moved on. I stood there looking at the yellow M&M. Neither of them looked at it. That should have mattered more to me than it did. The message continued. Each night, Zelda's normal recording played first. Then the other voice followed. And each time, it sounded slightly older. 17, 25, maybe 30. I began recording them on my phone, but the extra voice never appeared in the videos. When I played the recordings back, I heard only Zelda's ordinary message followed by static. One night, the older voice said, "Francis can't hear me." The next, "She doesn't know yet." Then, "You haven't told her." That was true. I had not told Francis anything beyond the vague comment about Zelda trying to scare me. I knew how it would sound. My wife already thought I was exhausted. She had started asking whether I could step away from the merger, as though I could simply tell the managing director that I was unavailable until two multinational companies finished rearranging themselves around each other. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. I lived on coffee and whatever food Francis left in the refrigerator. I could hear the argument she would make before she made it. Stress, sleep deprivation, auditory hallucinations. She would not be wrong to consider any of those things. Then, on Thursday night, the toy recorded something that had not been there when I arrived. I got home at 11:38. There was no message waiting. I pressed play. Nothing. I pressed the button again. The recorder made a faint mechanical click, but no audio came through. Relief washed over me. Then I noticed the left eyebrow was pressed down. The record button. The M&M was recording. I moved my hand away. The button remained depressed for another second. Then it slowly rose on its own. I should have left the house. Instead, I pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of the kitchen, the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, the soft ticking of the clock above the pantry. Then footsteps. Small footsteps approached the recorder. Zelda spoke. "Hi, Daddy." She sounded very close. "I don't want to do the messages anymore." A second voice answered from farther away. The other Zelda voice. "You don't have to." There was a pause. My daughter asked, "Who are you?" The recording ended. I ran upstairs so quickly that I slipped on the third step and struck my knee. Zelda was asleep. Francis woke up when I entered her room. "What are you doing?" she asked. I turned on Zelda's lamp. My daughter squinted and pulled the blanket over her head. "Dad?" I wanted to ask her about the recording. I wanted to ask who she had been talking to, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the voice had said, "You don't have to." Maybe I was afraid of what Zelda would say. Francis climbed out of bed. "Andrew, what is going on?" "I heard something downstairs." "What?" "I don't know." She stared at me. "You ran in here like somebody was in the house." "I thought someone was." Francis checked the hallway, then the windows. She looked under Zelda's bed, mostly to calm me down. There was nobody there. She led me out of the room and closed the door. "You need to sleep," she whispered. I heard Zelda talking. "She talks in her sleep sometimes." She was talking to someone. "Andrew." I heard another voice. Francis became very still. "What other voice?" I told her. Not everything. Not yet. Just that the recorder had captured Zelda speaking to someone who was not there. Francis came downstairs with me. The M&M sat on the counter. She looked at it with irritation more than fear. "Play it." I pressed the eyebrow. "Hi, Daddy." Zelda's voice. "I don't want to do the messages anymore." Then silence. No answer. No question. The recording clicked off. I stared at Frances. That's not the whole thing. She pressed play herself. Hi, Daddy. I don't want to do the messages anymore. Click. That isn't what I heard. Frances replayed it. Same result. You said there was another voice. There was. And Zelda asked who it was? Yes. Frances picked up the toy and inspected it. How old is this thing? I don't know. Could it be mixing recordings? It changes. What changes? The voice. I finally told her everything. The warning not to replay the message, the sentences about Frances, the voice growing older, the way it had called itself Zelda. Frances listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set the M&M down very carefully. Andrew, she said, you need to stop listening to this. I'm not imagining it. I'm not saying you are. You think I'm hallucinating. I think you've barely slept in 2 months. It knows that you can't hear it. Frances closed her eyes. Listen to what you're saying. I know how it sounds. Then please listen to yourself. I pressed play again. Zelda said she did not want to make the messages anymore. Nothing followed. Frances put both hands on the counter. Tomorrow, you're calling your boss. You're taking a day off, and you're sleeping. I can't take tomorrow off. Then call a doctor. I'm going to destroy it. She looked relieved. Fine. I carried the toy into the garage and placed it on the concrete floor. Frances followed me. I took a hammer from the workbench. The first strike cracked the M&M's plastic face. The second split its yellow body open. The third sent one white shoe skidding beneath Frances's car. The speaker produced a sharp burst of static. Then, from inside the broken plastic, the older voice said, "Don't go check on Zelda." I froze. "What?" Frances asked. "You didn't hear that?" Her voice changed. Not because she had heard it, because she had not. "Hear what?" I dropped the hammer and ran. Through the kitchen, up the stairs, down the hallway. Zelda's bedroom door was open. Her bed was empty. I shouted her name. Frances pushed past me and switched on the light. The blanket had been pulled back. The window was closed. The closet was empty. Then we heard Zelda laugh. From our bedroom. We found her curled beneath the comforter on Frances's side of the bed. She must have woken up while we were downstairs and climbed into our room. Frances pulled her close. I stood in the doorway, shaking. Zelda looked at me sleepily. "Daddy?" I went back to the garage. The broken M&M was silent. I put every piece I could find into a black garbage bag. I even crawled beneath Frances's car to retrieve the white shoe. Then I drove 15 minutes away and threw the bag into a dumpster behind a closed supermarket. I watched it disappear beneath cardboard and leaking trash bags. I did not sleep when I returned home. The next afternoon, I left the office at 4. I ignored 3 calls during the drive. For the first time in months, I arrived home while the sun was still up. Frances was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Zelda sat at the table drawing a castle with purple towers. She looked up when I entered. "You're home." I hugged her longer than usual. Frances watched me over Zelda's shoulder, but she did not say anything. I sat beside my daughter and watched her color. My hands were sweating. I had spent the entire drive telling myself that I needed one simple confirmation, one ordinary explanation, a joke, a misunderstanding, anything. "Hey, Zell." "Yeah? Can I ask you something?" She nodded without looking up. "Why did you say you didn't want to leave me messages anymore?" Her crayon stopped. "What messages?" The ones you leave when I work late. She looked at me. Frances stopped chopping vegetables. I swallowed. On the little yellow M&M. Zelda frowned. The what? The voice recorder, I said. The yellow M&M on the kitchen counter. She stared at me blankly. I could feel Frances looking at us. You press one eyebrow to record, I continued. You've been leaving me messages on it every night. Zelda's confusion deepened. Dad? I don't know what you're talking about. Behind me, the knife made a soft sound as Frances set it down. Andrew? She said. I turned. All the color had drained from her face. What? Frances looked toward the empty spot beside the microwave, then back at me. You said Zelda was leaving those recordings? My mouth went dry. Of course she was. Frances shook her head slowly. I thought they were from you. I stared at her. What? The toy, she said. I thought you were recording messages for Zelda before you left in the mornings. No. Her breathing became shallow. Neither of us moved. Zelda looked from Frances to me. Then she put down her purple crayon. Mom? Frances stepped away from the counter. Her eyes remained fixed on the place where the yellow M&M had stood every night for 4 months. Zelda's voice was very small when she asked, What little M&M? I used to think my brain was just badly wired. Every few weeks since the autumn I turned 12, my head hits the pillow and I don't just sleep. I switch channels. I wake up inside this massive echoing of a building. It's a shopping complex, but it stretches out forever, like a whole country built out of drywall and fake marble. For over 15 years, I kept it entirely to myself. How do you explain to someone that you spend your sleeping hours wandering through a retail center that doesn't exist? An impossible monument of indoor space that feels larger than most European countries. You don't. You keep it quiet, assuming your subconscious is just poorly wired, using childhood memories of suburban malls to construct an elaborate background of stress dreams about forgotten homework or unmade appointments. Then 6 months ago, I stumbled onto a corner of the internet that made my blood turn entirely to ice. I was scrolling through Reddit late at night, looking for nothing in particular, when a suggested community popped up on my feed. The mall world. I clicked out of mild curiosity, expecting some kind of vaporwave aesthetic or architectural appreciation group. Instead, I spent the next 6 hours sitting upright in the dark, sweating, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone. There were thousands of them, strangers from entirely different continents, speaking different language, coming from completely different backgrounds, all uploading hand-drawn blueprints, digital renderings, and meticulously detailed journals that perfectly mirrored the geography of my sleep. They weren't just dreaming of a mall, they were all being sent to the same mall. As I read through the archive, the sheer, staggering scale of the collective world building began to crystallize. The mall isn't just a building. It's an entire continent wrapped in drywall, marble, and concrete, divided into distinct, echoing territories that never shift their borders. Most dreamers, including myself, always manifest first in what the community calls the retail tier. It is an infinite network of pristine, modern white marble floors that stretch out beneath soaring, arched glass atriums. The architecture is an incoherent, dizzying jumble of eras. You can walk past a storefront that looks like a high-end, contemporary boutique, turn a sharp corner, and suddenly find yourself standing in a faded 1980s neon food court, complete with plastic pastel chairs, fall ivy hanging from planters, and a linoleum floor sticky with decades of invisible grease. The stores themselves are deeply unsettling. They have names that look familiar from a distance but blur into unreadable symbols when you try to focus your eyes on the signs. The window displays feature racks of clothing no human would ever wear, uncomfortably heavy coats, monochromatic uniforms, or shoes with completely flat, rubber soles that make no sound. The interiors of these shops are always dim, the metal security grates pulled halfway down, hinting at endless rows of inventory, stretching deep into the shadows where the retail workers, if they exist at all, never show their faces. If you walk far enough down the lower glass perimeters of the retail tier, the commercial spaces begin to thin out. The marble gives way to rough, stained concrete, and you enter the transit sector. This is a cavernous, subterranean network designed to handle a population that never arrives. It consists of doorless airport terminals, stretching into a gray haze, and echoing subway platforms where empty, automated trains slide silently along rusted, subterranean tracks. They hiss to a halt, open their doors for precisely 40 seconds, and then slide back into the darkness, heading toward destinations that don't exist. There are dizzying networks of escalators here, massive, industrial stairs that climb into the ceiling shadows at impossible angles, some moving too fast to safely step on, others frozen in place with steps missing, exposing the jagged, greasy gears beneath. Multi-lane highways cut through the concrete walls, completely devoid of cars, stretching for miles before simply ending in a sheer, unbarricaded drop into a pitch-black void. Deep within the upper levels, accessible only through specific, hidden service stairwells behind the clothing racks, lies the institutional sector. The forum users call it the Infinite School or the Endless Hospital. It is a suffocating, clinical maze of linoleum-lined hallways that smell heavily of industrial floor wax and stale cabbage. The walls are lined with thousands of dull green metal lockers that stretch beyond the horizon. If you try to open one, it is either welded shut or contains objects that defy logic. A single, waterlogged textbook written in a language you can't comprehend, or a pile of old, yellowed medical charts with your name at the top. The classrooms and examination rooms are always empty, illuminated by the harsh, rhythmic buzzing of flickering fluorescent lights, and the clocks on the walls run entirely backward, their hands ticking away seconds you can never recover. If you find a heavy industrial service elevator in those back corridors and press the buttons for the deep basement levels, the elevator drops for what feels like miles until the doors slide open into the aquatic tier. This is a massive indoor water park and pool room, completely abandoned by whatever staff built it. The air down here is choked with a heavy, thick steam that coats your skin in a greasy film within minutes. It is lined with damp, blue mosaic tiles, many of them cracked and weeping a rusty orange fluid. There are no recreational sounds here, no splashing, no laughter, just the echoing, hollow drip of condensation falling from the iron rafters hundreds of feet above. The dark, unmoving water pools are massive, stretching out into the gloom, hiding deep-end drop-offs that feel miles deep, beneath water slides that weave through the support pillars like concrete serpents. And finally, if you ever manage to find an exit door to the exterior of the complex, a rare feat that requires navigating the lowest maintenance tunnels, you don't find reality, you find the mall ocean. It is a frozen, jagged beach of gray sand sitting under a flat, ink-black sky that never experiences a sunrise. There is no wind, Yet the dark ocean water is constantly churning, the horizon dominated by massive, silent tsunamis that loom hundreds of feet in the air, frozen in time, always threatening to crash down upon the complex but never quite making impact. Across every single one of these sectors, the atmosphere is defined by three distinct sensory anchors. First, the air. It never changes. It is warm, humid, and heavily recycled, hanging like a damp weight over your chest. It carries a conflicting, suffocating cocktail of scents. The cloying sweetness of hot, synthetic cinnamon pretzels from the food court, the artificial chemical musk of cheap department store perfume counters, and the sharp, medicinal sting of indoor pool chlorine. It is the smell of a closed system, a greenhouse for the human subconscious. Second, the lighting. There are no natural light sources anywhere in Mall World. Everything is illuminated by an endless network of recessed bulbs, neon tubing, and massive, arched glass atriums. But if you look up through those glass panels, expecting to see the sun or the clouds, you are met with nothing but that flat, oppressive, ink-black void. The light inside the mall doesn't illuminate the outside. It merely keeps the dark from pressing too hard against the glass. Third, and perhaps most terrifying, are the other dreamers. The NPCs, as the forums call them. There are thousands of them shuffling through the corridors at any given moment. They look like normal people from a distance, but as they pass you, the horror settles in. They are hollow-eyed, silent sleepwalkers. They move in heavy, sluggish groups, their heads tilted slightly downward, their eyes fixed entirely on the polished floor. Nobody speaks. Nobody looks at each other. There is no conversation, no laughter, no conflict. It is just the endless, soft dragging of thousands of rubber-soled sneakers on polished marble, a white noise of collective entrapment that fills the corridors like a slow-moving river. They are people who have entirely accepted the rules of the layout. They don't try to find the exits. They don't try to wake up. They just slide through the commercial tracks, day after night, fulfilling their role as the background architecture of the simulation. I used to be able to navigate this place with a sense of detached curiosity. I knew the routes. I knew how to avoid the deeper transit drops, and I knew how to keep my distance from the silent crowds. But last night, the physics of the mall changed, the system hardened, and the boundaries between the dream and my bedroom began to dissolve entirely. When I went to sleep that night, my bedroom was normal. The radiators were clicking, a light rain was tapping against the glass, and the digital clock on my nightstand glowed a steady, comforting green. I did the usual routine, checked my phone, scrolled past a few updates on the forum, and rolled over. When my eyes opened, I wasn't in my bed. I was standing on the second tier of the retail center, directly outside the glass facade of an anchor department store. From a distance, the storefront looked like an old Sears or JCPenney, but when I focused on the signage, the blocky plastic letters were backwards, inverted into a gibberish font that hurt the back of my eyes to interpret. Usually, the transition into Mall World has a soft, liquid quality. You float into it, your limbs feel weightless, and you have this comforting, subconscious insurance policy running in the back of your head that says, "Relax, this is just a dream. If things get too weird, you can just pull the plug." But the second my feet touched the polished marble last night, that insurance policy was violently revoked. The physics of the world had hardened. When I pressed my palm against the plate glass window of the department store, it didn't give or blur. It was cold. It was solid. I could feel the microscopic imperfections in the glass, the faint layer of sticky synthetic dust coating the surface, and the deep, structural chill of a building that hadn't seen natural sunlight in a century. When I took a step, the rubber soles of my sneakers didn't glide. They caught on the polished stone with a sharp, loud, realistic squeak that echoed down the concourse. I stopped. I tried my usual tricks to force a waking reflex. I bit down on the side of my tongue, expecting the dull, painless pressure of a dream state injury. Instead, copper metallic pain flared instantly across my jaw, sharp and hot, filling my mouth with the unmistakable taste of blood. I pinched the soft skin on the inside of my forearm, twisting hard enough to tear the flesh. Nothing changed. The atrium didn't dissolve. The ink-black void beyond the glass ceiling didn't shatter. I was locked into the system. The simulation was locked tight. I stood there for what felt like hours, paralyzed by the sheer atmosphere of the concourse. The air was a suffocating wall of heat and recycled humidity. It felt heavy, like the air inside a commercial greenhouse right before a summer thunderstorm, smelling powerfully of stale industrial bleach, the chemical musk of sample perfumes, and that greasy, omnipresent scent of Cinnabon pretzels baking in an oven miles away. From hidden recessed panels in the brutalist concrete pillars above, the music droned. It was a degraded, warbling synth pop track from the late 1980s, playing at a fraction of its normal speed. The bass notes vibrated deep within my chest cavity, a slow, oceanic thrumming that sounded less like music and more like the mechanical heartbeat of the building itself. Down on the first tier, the sleepwalkers were moving. There were hundreds of them, shuffling along the commercial tracks in a slow, circular procession. They wore matching, faded gray or beige clothing, sweatpants, oversized t-shirts, flat shoes. Their hands were tilted uniformly downward at a precise 45-degree angle, eyes locked onto the white marble floor, tracking the subtle gray veins in the stone. A woman with tangled blonde hair shuffled past my tier. Her shoulder brushed against mine. Her skin was a translucent, sickly white, and her eyes were entirely wide, unblinking and dead. I reached out and grabbed her arm, desperate for human contact. "Hey," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and dry against the massive scale of the architecture. "Hey, do you know how to get down to the transit platforms? Do you know where the exits are?" She didn't look at me. She didn't even slow down. She simply pulled her arm out of my grip with a mechanical, unyielding momentum. Her eyes remained locked on the marble floor as she dragged her feet forward. Squeak, drag, squeak, drag. The white noise of their collective movement filled the entire multi-tiered canyon of the retail zone. They weren't visitors. They were the background processing power of the building, keeping the lights on with their collective compliance. Suddenly, a wave of intense physical sickness hit my dream body. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a violent, twisting agony that started deep in the pit of my stomach and radiated outward to my ribs. My vision blurred at the edges, darkening with a vignette of gray static. I doubled over, clutching my midsection, my knees buckling until I was kneeling on the freezing marble floor. Cold, greasy sweat broke out across my forehead. I needed a restroom immediately. The biological demands of my waking body were being translated into the dream with terrifying force, and I knew that if I threw up or collapsed here, on the pristine marble of the retail tier, I would be violating the visibility rules. I scrambled to my knees, then to my feet, leaning heavily against the structural pillars, and looked for a way out of the main concourse. Behind the dark department store, I found a heavy, unpainted steel door marked with a fading plastic plaque. Employees only, no admittance. I threw my weight against the crash bar. The door groaned and swung inward, clicking shut behind me with a heavy, magnetic thud that instantly cut the warbling elevator music in half. I had entered the institutional sector. The contrast was immediate and terrifying. The marble vanished, replaced by endless stretches of pale green linoleum that had been buffed to a high reflective sheen. The air smelled entirely different here. The sweet cinnamon was gone, replaced by a suffocating combination of industrial floor wax, stale cabbage, and the sharp vinegar tang of medicinal alcohol. The walls were lined with thousands of dull green metal lockers, stretching out into a straight, forced perspective that seemed to converge at a single point miles into the dark. I stumbled down the hallway, my shoulder dragging against the metal lockers, the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the vents overhead, keeping time with my frantic breathing. The lighting here was worse. Every few yards, a long fluorescent tube would flicker violently, casting long, jittery shadows down the green linoleum that looked like reaching fingers. As I passed locker number 4082, something caught my eye, stretching deeply into the dull green paint, slicing through the rust to expose the shiny metal beneath, was a line of crude, frantic handwriting. It didn't look like the default gibberish script of the mall. It was English. I stopped, gasping for air, and traced the letters with my shaking fingers. The bathrooms are flooding, the graffiti read. They are missing the doors because the janitor needs to see your face. If you conceal the interior, the pressure seals the latch. Don't look down the pipes. Oh God, please don't look down the pipes. A cold dread settled over my chest, sharper than the physical pain in my stomach. Someone had been here. They had stood in this exact concrete artery, feeling the same sickness, looking at the same endless rows of lockers. Before I could process the message, a sound echoed from the far end of the institutional corridor. It was a slow, heavy, wet, dragging sound. Skluck, thump, skluck, thump. I froze, holding my breath, staring down the green linoleum line. Out of the dim, flickering shadows at the end of the hall, a figure emerged. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and wore a heavy, stained blue jumpsuit that looked like an industrial maintenance uniform. A massive loop of rusted iron keys hung from its belt, clinking together with a rhythmic, metallic chime that set my teeth on edge. It was the janitor. It carried a massive industrial mop with a wooden handle that was splintered and dark with old moisture. But it wasn't cleaning the floor. The mop head was soaked in a thick, dark, oily fluid that left a wide, iridescent smear across the pristine linoleum as it moved. The janitor's face was completely obscured by a heavy rubber gas mask, the glass lenses completely blacked out, reflecting nothing but the flickering fluorescent tubes above. It stopped. The black lenses of the mask slowly tilted upward, locking onto me from 100 yards away. A deep mechanical wheeze vibrated through the mask's filtration valves, a wet, rattling inhalation that sounded like a man drowning in his own lungs. It began to accelerate, its strides lengthening, the wet mop moving rhythmically as it advanced down the narrow hallway. Skluck thump, skluck thump. Panic tore through my sickness. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, my flat shoes sliding violently on the slick linoleum. I didn't look back. I just ran, passing thousands of identical green lockers, turning left down an unmarked corridor, then right into a narrow concrete stairwell that led straight down into the foundations of the building. The air grew rapidly colder, thicker, and darker with every flight of stairs I descended. The smell of bleach and wet rust intensified until it was a physical weight in the back of my throat. I burst through a final, dented aluminum door at the bottom of the stairs, escaping the janitor's clinking keys, and stepped directly into the subterranean utility underbelly of the mall. I had found the restrooms. The sheer scale of the public restroom sector was staggering. defying any logical sense of internal architecture. It didn't look like a bathroom inside a commercial building. It looked like an abandoned, flooded subway terminal from the turn of the century that had been repurposed to handle a massive, hidden population. The floor was buried under a steady, 1-inch layer of murky, stagnant gray water. The moment my sneakers splashed into it, a bitter, icy chill shot straight up my shins, numbing my skin. The water was thick with filth. Floating in the slow currents were dissolved yellow clumps of industrial toilet paper, unidentifiable gray debris, and long, greasy clots of dark hair that drifted against my ankles like wet spiders. The walls were lined with cracked, rectangular green tiles, heavily stained with long, vertical streaks of orange rust and limescale, where the plumbing behind the drywall was weeping. Black mold grew in dense, velvet-like patches along the grout lines, blooming in the corners like rotting lace. Overhead, a line of naked, yellow incandescent bulbs hung from frayed black cords, flickering in a slow, irregular rhythm that filled the cavernous room with shifting, jittery shadows. Stretching out into the dim distance were rows of exposed, doorless porcelain stalls. There was no privacy here, no wood, no metal dividers that extended past the waist, no latches. The partitions between the toilets were made of thick, reinforced industrial glass that had turned a sickly, translucent yellow from decades of grease and neglect. Every single exposed toilet was overflowing, stained with deep ring marks of old filth and backed up sludge that smelled heavily of copper and raw sewage. And the dreamers were here. Dozens of them were scattered throughout the flooded terminal. They looked exactly like the sleepwalkers from the retail tier, hollow-eyed, silent, and completely hollowed out by the rules of the mall. They stood or sat in the doorless stalls, completely exposed to the central walkway, their faces entirely blank as they stared straight ahead into the middle distance. They didn't care about the lack of privacy. They didn't care about the gray water soaking their feet, or the thick smell of copper, raw sewage, and heavy industrial bleach that filled the air. They had accepted the visibility. They had accepted the rot. My stomach twisted again, a sharp reminder of the sickness that had driven me down here. But the sheer, visceral disgust of the environment made my chest tight. I couldn't do it. I couldn't strip away the last remaining boundary of my waking dignity in front of these dead-eyed shapes. I turned away from the main rows and began walking deeper into the dark recesses of the utility sector, splashing slowly through the murky water. The room seemed to expand horizontally the further I walked. The yellow bulbs grew fewer and farther between, leaving huge, yawning patches of the concrete terminal in near total darkness. The white porcelain of the exposed toilets gave way to ancient, cracked stone through caked-in layers of dark, hardened sludge. The pipes overhead were massive now, thick iron conduits, wrapped in peeling insulation that dripped heavy, black condensation onto my hair and shoulders with a rhythmic, hollow, plop, plop, plop. I walked for what felt like miles, leaving the silent sleepwalkers far behind me. The main terminal had reduced to a distant, dim perspective, lines of flickering yellow light. Down here, in the deep dark of the utility sector, the water was deeper, rising to the middle of my calves, and the stench of decay was so thick I had to breathe through my sleeve to keep from throwing up. Then in the absolute furthest, darkest corner of the concrete wall, I saw it. It was an architectural impossibility, a single, enclosed stall that actually possessed a heavy, solid wooden door. It was painted a faded, sickly hospital green, completely out of place against the green tiles and raw concrete of the utility sector. The wood was swollen from the constant moisture, its bottom edge rotting away into the gray water, and the surface was slick with a thin layer of greasy film. I scrambled toward it, my legs heavy as I pushed through the freezing water. I reached out and touched the wood. It felt impossibly real, the grain splintering under my fingertips. I looked back down the long, flooded corridor I had just traversed. The silent dreamers were hundreds of yards away, fading into the gloom. None of them were looking at me. The janitor's keys were nowhere to be heard. I stepped inside the small, damp enclosure. The interior was tiny, just enough for a single, ancient porcelain bowl that was surprisingly clean compared to the rest of the facility. I turned around, grabbed the edge of the heavy green door, and pulled it shut. It took a massive effort to force the swollen wood into the warped frame, but with a dull, wet scrape, it clicked into place. I reached down and slid a thick, rusty iron bolt into the metal latch. The moment the iron bolt clicked home, the world changed. A profound, absolute, heavy silence fell over the room. The sound of the dripping condensation from the iron rafters instantly vanished. The distant, soft splashing of the sleepwalkers outside died. Even the low, ambient hum of the mall's ventilation system, which had been a constant background noise since I turned 12, completely ceased. The silence was so sudden, so violent, that my ears began to ring with a high-pitched metallic whine. I was completely alone, cut off from the simulation. I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cold, damp green wood of the door, letting out a ragged, trembling breath of relief. For the first time in 15 years, I had found a corner of mall world where nothing could see me. Then the silence began to feel heavy, pressurized. I looked down. The gray debris-filled water around my shoes had stopped moving entirely. It was perfectly still, like a sheet of dark glass. Then, a deep, rhythmic vibration started beneath the solid concrete floor. It wasn't a sudden shock wave or an earthquake. It was a slow, agonizingly deliberate pulse that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. Thump. The vibration traveled up through the water, through the soles of my sneakers, and into the bones of my legs. Thump. The wooden door behind me escalated against its frame. The iron bolt groaned. Thump. I turned around slowly, my back pressing tight against the green wood, my eyes wide as I stared down at the porcelain bowl. The water wasn't draining. It began to rise. It moved slowly, smoothly, and silently, overflowing the white rim like a dark luxury fountain. But it wasn't water anymore. It had transformed into a thick, viscous, jet-black sludge that looked exactly like old, degraded engine oil. It didn't make a splashing sound as it hit the floor. It just slid into the stagnant gray water, turning everything it touched instantly, completely black. The air in the stall turned freezing cold and the smell of bleach vanished entirely. It was replaced by an overwhelming, choking stench of copper, wet earth, and something deeply, anciently rotten. The smell of a grave that had been flooded and left to stew for a century. And then came the sound from the plumbing. It wasn't a human voice. It was a low, agonizingly slow intake of breath, a wet, hollow suction sound that echoed up directly through the pipes beneath the floor, drawing the very air right out of the stall. The metal conduits inside the walls began to groan and shriek, the iron twisting under an immense, unnatural internal pressure as whatever was deep inside the drainage system began to shift its weight, pulling itself upward toward the opening. The black sludge on the floor was rising rapidly now, covering my shoes, soaking straight through the canvas fabric. The very second the fluid seeped through my socks and touched my bare skin, a horrific, ice-cold chemical sting flared up my legs. It felt like liquid nitrogen, being poured directly onto my flesh. A freezing fire that made my muscles seize, Panicking, I spun around and grabbed the rusty iron bolt to escape. The metal wouldn't move. The damp wood of the door had rapidly swelled under the changing pressure of the room, locking the iron latch tightly into the rusted frame. "Open," I whispered, pulling at the metal. It didn't budge. Panic completely overtook my remaining restraint. I shoved the latch with both hands, slamming my palms against the splintered wood, shouting into the empty hallway. "Open! Open!" Behind me, the gurgling suction sound in the pipes grew louder, deeper, and faster. It was a wet, rhythmic churning that was inches away now. The heavy iron toilet bowl began to crack, long, spiderweb lines of fracture spreading across the white porcelain as the massive pressure from underneath reached its absolute breaking point. The black sludge was boiling over the top now, filling the small enclosure, rising past my shins, burning my skin with an agonizing, freezing torment. I didn't look back. I didn't turn around. I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that if I turned around and looked down into that cracking porcelain hole, whatever was causing that pressure would be looking back up at me. With a raw animal scream, I threw my entire weight backward, hurling my shoulder against the center of the wooden panels. The old wood splintered with a deafening, explosive crack. The iron latch tore completely out of the rotting frame, throwing me backward out of the stall. I tumbled backward out of the stall, crashing violently into the flooded, filthy main corridor of the restroom, sending a massive spray of murky gray water into the air. I scrambled to my knees, gasping for air, my hands slipping and sliding in the sludge as I desperately tried to find purchase on the slick tiles. I hauled myself to my feet and ran, my legs burning from the chemical sting. As I sprinted back toward the distant yellow bulbs and neon signs, I risked one look over my shoulder. The green wooden door was hanging wide open, shattered down the center. The entire interior of the stall was completely filled to the ceiling with a solid, shifting mass of pitch-black sludge, slowly oozing out of the main corridor like a massive wet tongue. As I ran past the long rows of doorless stalls, the hollow-eyed dreamers slowly turned their heads in perfect unison. They didn't look at the black sludge filling the corridor. They looked directly at me. They watched me run with cold, dead, deeply disapproving eyes. I had broken the rules of the layout. I had sought privacy from the system, and they knew it. I burst through the heavy metal exit door. I sprinted back into the concrete hallways of the institutional sector, and I didn't stop until I hit the marble floors of the retail tier. Without thinking, without looking, I threw myself over the third-story glass railing, targeting the white marble floor 40 feet below, to force the dream's defense mechanism to eject me. I snapped awake in my bed with a violent, full-body jerk, gasping for air so hard my chest bruised against my ribs. My heart was hammering against my sternum like a trapped bird, and my sheets were twisted tightly around my limbs, drenched in a thick, cold sweat. I sat up straight in the dark bedroom for 20 minutes, forcing my breath to slow down, staring at the green glow of my digital clock. It was 3:42 a.m. The rain was still tapping against my window. The radiators were still clicking. It was just a dream, I whispered into the quiet room, my voice shaking. Just a very vivid, very distorted nightmare. You're home. You're awake. But as I sat there trying to calm my racing mind, I noticed the air in my bedroom felt incredibly heavy, humid, and within minutes, the faint, undeniable scent of warm cinnamon pretzels and industrial floor wax began to drift out from the hallway vents. I swung my legs out of bed, intending to go to the kitchen and throw up, but the moment my bare feet hit the hardwood floor, a sharp, burning agony shot up my legs, so intense I collapsed back onto the mattress with a groan. I turned on my bedside lamp and pulled up my pant legs. My ankles and the tops of my feet were covered in angry, weeping red welts. The skin was blistered and raw, forming a perfect, horizontal line around my shins, matching the exact waterline of the black sludge from the green stall. 10 minutes ago, I forced myself to walk to the bathroom to wash the cold sweat off my face. I stood at the sink, gripping the porcelain basin, staring at my pale, terrified reflection in the mirror. I reached out with a trembling hand and turned the cold water knob. Deep inside the drywall, the pipes let out a slow, rhythmic, heavy thump, and the water running from my faucet came out completely black. I am sitting on my kitchen floor right now, writing this on my phone because my hands are shaking too badly to hold a pen. The bathroom door across the hall is wide open. I didn't close it. I don't think I can ever close a door again. I can hear my neighbor upstairs turning on their shower, and through the ceiling structure, I can hear their pipes letting out that same deep, rhythmic thump. It's spreading through the plumbing of the entire building. The infrastructure is shifting. I am terrified to close my eyes tonight, because I know that when the sleep takes me, I'll wake up right back on that marble tier, and I know that the next time I run past those doorless stalls, the sleepwalkers won't just watch me run. They'll be waiting for me to take my place. It was Wednesday that day. I know it was Wednesday because the streets were littered with cash. Hundreds, thousands of dollars sitting out in the open air. Tables lined the front of every house, full of the most extravagant food money could make. Whole tuna, tropical fruits, entire pigs roasted over open fires. We were poor, so we were exempted from doing the same. We took what our bellies could handle and went about our day, making sure to not step on the money. We could take those too, but only just enough. The thing is, we never knew what was enough and what was too much, so we never took any. It wasn't worth the gamble. It was tradition, or rather, a precaution. We never owned more than we needed. The wardens made sure of that. If you owned too much at any given time, then the wardens came to balance your books. Wednesday was when folks got paid, so they took what they needed to survive the coming weeks and threw the rest of the money out, or spent it to feed their neighbors. I remember the first time I saw the wardens, when a family was passing by our town. Their car had broken down. A father, a mother, and a son who was my age. It was Tuesday when they came into town. I could only imagine their surprise when, waking up in their hotel room on Wednesday morning, they saw the streets aglint with cold, hard cash and food. No one bothered to warn them. They wouldn't have listened. What would you have done? Seeing thousands on the street, free for the taking at the cost of the ire of some country bumpkins? You'd stuff your pockets, of course. That was what they did. Their son was the only one who had sense to not take the money. Was it naivety or instinct? The parents knew what $1 was worth. It was inner peace and easy living, littered on the pavement, calling to them. That night I heard terrible screaming. Terrible screaming. A primal, infectious fear that clung to you like thick, sticky tar. "Hear that, son?" said my father, smoking by the window. "That's what happens when you take money on Wednesdays." He wouldn't let me watch, so I snuck out when he thought I was asleep. It was over by the time I got to where I thought I heard the cries. It was in front of the hotel. Under the moonlight of a rainy night, grand feasts on silken sheets were now crowded with insects, as rain sent money into storm drains. Can you smell it? Decaying food and rain, and amongst that soft smell cuts a sanguine stench. Blood, fresh, warm, being washed away from mangled things that might have been human. There in the parking lot of the hotel was a pile of rectangular flesh, of skin and muscle and bone, sliced into sheets as thin as paper. The skin was cut so thin you could almost see through it. Little dissections of bone and teeth and intestines were like messed up confetti on the ground. I saw the thin notes of muscle on the ground and could count the individual fibers on them. I thought that if I ate it, it would melt on my tongue. I didn't know what to think. It didn't feel real to me. I wouldn't eat for weeks after, though I never told my family why. Told them I was just sick. I wondered how it happened. Was it slow? Did the wardens peel them? Did they writhe out in terrible pain, calling for the only person they loved more than life? What did their son see? Did he try to protect the parents? Did he claw desperately at those things as they ripped his world apart with inhuman hands? That was when I heard a splat. I tasted it before I saw it. Blood, iron, concrete. The son spared the warden's wrath, jumped from the hotel roof. The next day there was nothing left of the family. Everyone was happy. They thought the deaths meant the wardens would become more lenient, allowing us to hold on to a little more wealth. But no one ever dared to test the theory. The second time I saw the wardens was when my sister got cancer. We were in a very small town. The things she needed were in the city, and that cost money. Lots of it. Lots more than we could have at a time. Our father was a diabetic. His insulin alone kept us near the limit of how much money or value we could hold at any given moment. That's why we never threw out money or had food out for our neighbors. She was the smartest one in the family. She had dreams of becoming a nurse. She had the grades for it and secured herself a scholarship at a big Ivy League school. If someone was going to make it out of our crazy town, it was her. And so, on that early Wednesday morning, I decided to make off with as much money as I could. If the other family died once the sun went down, I figured I had time. Time to pick up the money in the streets, the hundreds that lay there crumbling under the sun. Maybe I could take a bus, get her away from it all, I thought. Where are you going? My sister found me. The chemo made it hard for her to sleep. Going for a run. Yeah, right. She was holding on to her IV pole. You caught me. Just heading out to try out the tacos Mr. Eduardo set out. Be back soon. Hey, she yelled. Don't do anything stupid. And so I ran to the streets clawing frantically at $100 bills on my knees. Each bill in my hand flashed images of that poor kid, that husband and wife. Would we end up like them? I pushed those thoughts away, focused on the pain on my knees as little stones and glass shards dug into my legs. I thought of my sister, who was just 16 years old, the same age as me when I saw that poor family get ripped apart, layer by layer. I got the money, ran home, and told my family what I had done. We can pay for her chemo now, I cried out as I burst through the door. My father was screaming at me. My mother covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing quietly. My sister didn't know what to feel. I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, yet could only hear a horrible, gut-wrenching cry from her mouth. It was like a knife being twisted in my heart. She wanted to live. I wanted her to live. I guess some part of my parents were relieved at that moment. I'd sacrificed myself for her. They knew I was dead. They were relieved of the horrible predicament of choosing whether to let my sister die, or let someone else die for her. And so I set out. It was turning dark then. The sun threatened to sink down the horizon. We didn't own a car, and so we looked for anyone willing to take us out of town and into the city. No one would dare give us a ride, not the buses or our neighbors. They'd seen what I'd done, knew exactly what was in the trash bag slung over my shoulder. They wanted to live too, even if it meant letting us both die. It was almost dusk when I came up with something. If we could make it out of town on foot, reach the border, maybe we could escape. So we ran. My sister tripped and fell often. Her chemo made her joints painful, and she bled for longer. But we kept running until our lungs were on fire, and our calves felt like bags of broken glass. We were at the edge of town now, just a few kilometers away from the sign over the road that said, "Please come again." I remember the moment the sun came down entirely. We were just 2 kilometers away from the border. I was carrying my sister on one shoulder, the trash bag on the other. It was dark then, the road stretching out among tall evergreens. I was running, delirious and in pain, when we finally heard it, the footfall of what sounded like 100, no, 1,000 men, rushing after us barefoot and silent. I could hear no panting or breathing from them, no demands or threats, just feet against the road slamming like angry hands knocking on stone. I could hear bloodlust in their feet. Just remembering it now sends horrible chills up my back. My sister was screaming then so terribly. I wondered if that dead kid's parents sounded like her. Maybe if they had a daughter, she'd have screamed the way my sister did then, calling for our mother, begging me to keep going, crying that they were getting closer. I thought so many times then to just drop her on the road, get to the border on my own and tell them she was in the city getting treatment. No one would ever know. But I would. And so I ran and ran, never looking back, never putting a face to that legion. In my nightmares, I imagined them to be naked devils, chasing us on foot. Sometimes I dreamed that the steps are from a giant centipede, sometimes a snake, sometimes men in suits, and sometimes nothing at all. But I kept running, the fear fueling me on until I could see it, the sign. It was downhill from here, an easy run, but it was far, and they were gaining on us. I could feel warm air on the back of my neck as those things silently followed us, just a hair away from us. I felt something pull on my sister, my right ear deafened and ringing from her endless screaming. I did not relent, and kept running, until soon I felt cold, dry hands caressing my skin. I felt its long nails, or maybe it was talons or fangs, rub up against the back of my neck. It ran through my mind 100 times. It would catch me, taking me to the ground, the taste of asphalt and forest grinding against my teeth. It would rip me apart slowly and steadily and make bills out of my skin, coins from my bones, and my sister would become nothing but ribbons of flesh. Except it didn't catch me. I fell to the ground ready for the end. When I looked up and saw welcome, we had made it, just barely. I looked back and saw nothing but an empty road and giant evergreens. We sat there, the clean air whisking away the sweat. Looking at my sister, she had a rectangular patch taken from her cheek. We survived. The bag of money was still intact, $200,000 in $100 bills. We kept walking until we found a gas station. We called a taxi and went straight to the hospital. My sister survived the chemo and went to college. I never returned home. I still send letters back home, though. I never get anything back.
Four days ago I posted a video that was an hour long, and said that if it could reach 500 likes I would do another. This is me delivering on that promise. I actually had a ton of fun recording this video, so if there is similar support on this one, I'll try and do another one in the near future. So if you enjoy these longer videos, be sure to drop a like, as it not only takes a quick second and helps promote the channel, it also lets me know that I did something right. In today's video, I will be telling 7 stories. Each one will be bringing something unique to the table, from a library with a strange history, to a story of an abandoned road. We will be delving into the paranormal, the supernatural, and just the strange and bizarre. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you're new around here and you enjoy the content, please be sure to subscribe, as it is always appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. There's a trail near my house. It winds through a small park and then into a narrow strip of woods before running along a field beside a housing division. From there, it goes past a cornfield, and then loops through the woods again. There's a pond at the fork, where the loop begins. It's covered in water lilies and they bloom white and pink in the spring. And there's a stone, flat-topped and broad, upon which people leave coins or trinkets as they enter the woods. I remember as a child being given a dime by my parents and told to place it on the stone. For the fairy of the woods, they said, so she'd bless us with luck. Then I got older and the story changed. She was a witch or a ghoul or some other evil dead thing. The gifts were no longer a luck charm, but tribute to appease her hatred. Those that failed to leave an offering didn't make it out of the woods. My friends and I ride our bikes along the trail often. It's packed dirt and gravel, and it's cooler underneath the shade of the trees. We all stop at the fork and leave something on the stone, like our parents taught us, and like everyone else that walks this trail. Even the runners with their spandex and water bottles find a pocket to slip a shiny rock or a quarter into to leave behind. Everyone in town knows about the tradition. Last month we stopped, and Kyle was the first to approach the stone. He didn't leave anything, however. He swept his hand along the top, sliding everything that was on it off and into his cupped palm. Then he poured the trove of coins and random junk into his pockets. I asked him what he was doing. My heart was beating faster just watching him, thinking of the woman in the woods. Watching, surely watching, as he stole what was hers. "You know someone is coming out here and taking this, right?" he said. "It's clean every morning. I'm probably doing them a favor by helping get the junk out of here." It was implied that whoever collected the offerings every night was a normal person, not a witch, not a ghoul. I felt like I was in grade school again, when the older students were telling us that we knew Santa was just our parents, right? And no one wanted to be the one to sound stupid by disagreeing, even though we hadn't known, and now the magic was ruined. Then he got on his bike again, and we were left to follow. I hesitated, thinking about the broken hair clip in my pocket, a metallic rainbow butterfly that I thought was pretty enough to leave behind. My other friends were moving on though, without leaving anything, and I didn't want to be the superstitious one, so I kept the hair clip in my pocket. We left the woods without incident, and I thought that was proof that Kyle was right, that it was just some silly game that everyone played along with because it was fun, like how we still left cookies for Santa, although now we left a Dr. Pepper instead of milk, because Dad really likes Dr. Pepper. Kyle used the money collected to buy a candy bar from the gas station on the way home. I was angry because he refused to share the money with the rest of us, and we had to go without. We had a new tradition after that. Kyle would stop and collect all the offerings from the stone when we entered the woods, and we'd parcel them among the group outside the gas station. If there was enough to buy candy, we'd go inside. Otherwise, we'd take our stolen spoils home, and maybe throw out the junk. I kept a lot of it in a shoebox under my bed. I like to collect things. My mom says I'm a pack rat, like my dad. A week ago, Maria told me that something strange happened while she was in the woods. She was with her parents on an evening walk, and she noticed that the trees were all silent. There were no birds and the air was still. Her parents didn't seem to notice anything odd, but she started looking around, peering into the trees and the growing shadows in the brush. And she thought she saw something, a hunched figure, white, scuttering along the ground. It was large, far too large to be a dog. She'd grabbed her dad's sleeve and pointed it out to him. He peered into the woods, didn't see anything, and then stepped off the trail to investigate. Maria stood close to her mother's side and waited while he wandered through the trees for a moment, scanning his surroundings, before returning to tell her that he hadn't seen anything, probably a raccoon, he suggested. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, however, and the next time we all went along the trail, she refused to take her share of the money, and Kyle kept it for himself. Then 4 days ago, we all saw her, the woman in the woods. We'd made a habit of going on the loop almost every day, as we were giddy with all the coins and neat things we were taking from the stone. Some of it was junk, like beer bottle caps, but there was always coins, and sometimes there was something interesting, like a chunk of quartz or a cheap metal bracelet. We were halfway through the loop, about to hit the shallow downhill portion. Kyle was in front, his pockets heavy with the stolen offering. The woods were quiet, as it was not very large, and there wasn't a lot of wildlife living in it. Then I heard a branch snap, like it was right over my shoulder, and I instinctively turned to look. All my friends pivoted as well, half standing on our bikes to turn around. We all heard it. A woman stood on the trail. Her hair was matted, her head was bowed so we couldn't see her face, and she wore a dirty white dress that stopped at her knees, the hemline tattered and trailing threads. Her hands hung loose at her side. None of us said anything. We didn't need to. As one mind, we all turned back around and bent over our handlebars. I pushed down as hard as I could, my breath caught in my chest, trying to get my bike going faster than it already was. The downhill helped. I shifted into my highest gear, hit my top speed, and we raced for the end of the loop and the trail that would take us out of the woods. I looked back once. The woman stood on the trail, the same distance away as she had been before. I thought, this is impossible. And that was the only thing I remember thinking, like it's frozen in perfect clarity in my mind. The image of that woman standing there on the trail. We didn't stop until we were at the park, and there were other people around. Only then, once we were across the wood bridge, did we stop. We spread out, jumping off our bikes and dropping them into the grass, panting and shaking with exertion. I hadn't ever rode my bike that hard. The air burned in my throat, and I desperately wanted something to drink. It was Maria that said we had to take it back, that we'd angered the woman in the woods, and she wouldn't forgive us unless we took it back and apologized. That started a fight. Kyle said we were just being cowards, that we hadn't seen anything weird, and it was just someone out running, and we were all letting our imaginations get the better of us. And we all fell into our own thoughts. Maria wanted to return it all. Steven thought that maybe this was a warning, and we should maybe just not take anything in the future. And Matt just didn't want to ever go in the woods again. Kyle finally grabbed his bike, yanked it upright, and jumped on. He pedaled off while we yelled at him to come back, and took all the stolen tribute with him. I went to the woods 2 days ago. I'm not certain why. I thought I had to prove to myself what had happened was real or not. I didn't leave anything behind on the stone. I think I was daring the woman to come out, to let me see her again, so I could know that she hadn't been some trick of the mind, that she was real. I was biking along at a good clip, trying to keep enough speed so that I wouldn't struggle to really accelerate if I had to be in a pinch. Then something moved on the trail ahead of me. Something small and thin and quick, and I braked hard, turning my bike sideways and dragging a foot on the ground to stop. It was a tiny garden snake. I had been about to run it over. I put down the kickstand and went over to herd it off the trail. I like snakes. I want one as a pet, but my parents keep telling me that the cats will kill it. It slithered away from me, off into the grass and then into the leaves. Satisfied, I looked up at the woods in front of me. The woman stood just yards away. She didn't move, and I stared at her. At her matted gray-brown hair and her paunchy white flesh, like she'd been left out in the rain too long. The woods were silent. There were no birds, and the only sound I heard was my own breathing. Finally, I took a step backwards. She took a step forward, and then my nerve broke and I turned and ran for my bike, jumping on it and trying to accelerate as fast as I could, fighting the gears to gain speed. I saw the woman out of the corner of my eye. She was on all fours and she seemed to flow across the ground, pulling herself along with long fingers, and her legs were skewed like a spider. Dry branches broke as she charged through them, and I heard her racing after me, and I thought she was gaining and I wanted to cry. My heart hammered in my chest. And then silence. And I realized I'd blown past the entrance to the loop and was on the trail back to the park. I glanced back and saw nothing behind me. I called everyone when I got home, told them we weren't imagining things, and to please stay out of the woods. Maria promised she would, and she sounded earnest. The others were more uncertain, but Kyle Kyle laughed at me and told me to stop making up stories. Yesterday, Kyle went missing. I heard the police downstairs an hour ago, talking to my parents. They wanted to know if I'd been with him earlier today, and they said no, that I'd been home all day helping with a garage sale. I didn't go downstairs to tell them what really happened. That he'd refused to listen to me, that he thought we were just imagining all of this, and that he'd gone out to the trail to prove that we were wrong, and take the tribute all for himself. My parents told me later that they were trying to find Kyle, and that he was probably okay, that sometimes kids ran off, but they wanted me to not go anywhere alone for a little bit, just in case. I typed all this up yesterday, and it's just been sitting here in Google Drive while I debated on whether or not to post it. I'm posting it now from my phone, because I want someone to know what's happened in case I don't come back. I didn't listen to my parents. I told them Mario was outside, and we were going to ride bikes together, and then I ran into the garage before they could see I was lying and got my bike. I had the shoebox with all the tribute I'd amassed under my arm, along with a roll of quarters to make up for what I'd spent. I went to the shrine. I dumped all of this out onto the stone. I thought maybe she'd understand that I was sorry, and I wanted to make up for not leaving offerings earlier. I've been kneeling in the grass for 20 minutes, staring at my phone. My knees hurt, and my feet have fallen asleep, but I'm terrified to move. There's a hand on my shoulder. The fingers are long and bony, the nails yellow, and wet dirt clings to the white skin. The forest is silent, and the only thing I can hear is my own breathing. I'm going to post this, then I'm going to stand up and turn around. When I was growing up, my mom would always tell us this story about how she is sure she met and talked to a ghost when she was a kid. I thought it would be a good fit for here. The story isn't going to be too long, and it might seem kinda predictable, but this is what she used to tell us. My mom was a little girl back in the early 1970s. One day, her mom, my grandma, took her and her brother to a kind of locally famous amusement park. My mom was very excited to be there because the park had been closed for a few weeks, and it had just recently opened back up. There was a new ride that had opened recently before the park closed that she wanted to ride. It was a new type of ride, and was being touted as the first of its kind. From what she said, it was a merry-go-round ride. But instead of just the horse themselves going up and down, the entire carousel itself was on a lift system, where machinery underneath it would pump the ride up and down as well, all while it was still slowly spinning, as merry-go-rounds do. At the full height, the carousel would be lifted something like 5 feet from the ground. Walking into the park, there was a corkboard with maps, news, events, what have you. That was in the center of the park entrance. She says she didn't pay much mind to this board upon entering, other than to look at the map to find where the carousel she wanted to ride was. She found where it was, but there was a problem. The ride was no longer in operation. My grandma apologized to her, and assured her that they'd be able to ride the regular merry-go-round as much as she wanted. My mom was a little girl though, and children don't really understand concepts of legalities, or what have you. So she of course interpreted the situation as her being not allowed to, or something being withheld from her unjustly. So she was kinda just being a little brat the whole time, making a fuss, and like a mischievous child sometimes do, she became determined she'd get to have what she wanted. When the three of them were on the very slow ride together, my mom took the opportunity to undo her safety belt and hop off the ride to go and find the carousel ride. This was the 1970s, and amusement park riders' safety and regulations and stuff weren't the best, obviously. I can only imagine this is the reason why she was able to slip off the ride completely unnoticed by employees at the time. Or maybe they did notice, and they just didn't care. Anyways, by sheer dumb luck, she somehow actually managed to find the carousel ride, and she managed to slip into the building that the carousel ride was in. As I mentioned earlier, the ride was one that would be lifted up and down. When she found the ride, it wasn't 100% down on the ground. She struggled to get up onto the ride and managed to. Then she sat on a reachable horse and waited for the ride to go. Unsurprisingly, it didn't, because, yeah, obviously, no ride operator. But little kids don't understand that type of thing anyways. So she got down and walked over to the control panel, blindly pressing different buttons to see if they would do anything. Nothing. So this leads to something I didn't mention until now. That machinery that the carousel was on that would lift it up and down, that wasn't 100% completely exposed. It wasn't in anything. There was no shielding or anything like it. This would pretty much never be allowed these days, but again, it was the 70s. So for whatever reason she decided, hey, I bet that if I go under the carousel, then I can press something there to get it to go. She walks over to the ride and is crawling on the floor to get her tiny body through the slight gap between the carousel and the ground. When she says she heard a voice, it said something along the lines of, "That isn't safe." When she looked over behind her, she told us she saw a woman whose face she's never forgotten. She had big, beautiful dark brown eyes and straight brown hair that came down to her shoulders. Though her words were scolding, her smile was warm and kind. She was dressed in the same uniform a lot of the staff were wearing, so my mom assumed she was one of the workers there. The woman crouched down to meet my mom's eye level, as my mom abandoned her crawling position and instead sat up, looking up at the woman. From what my mom could remember, the woman asked her, "Did you get away from your mommy?" And my mom nodded. Then the woman said, "Don't you think she must be worried sick?" My mom had kept quiet at the question, and the woman offered my mom a hand and said, "We should go find her. Don't worry, she won't be mad at you." My mom took the woman's hand. She said it was cold, kind of like when you touch ice, but everything else about the woman was warm and comforting. The woman led my mom to the front of the building and leaned down again and put a hand on her shoulder and said, "You need to wait here and cover your ears nice and tight, okay?" My mom nodded and did as she was told. She looked straight ahead and, in retrospect, thinks that the woman must have pulled some kind of fire alarm or burglar alarm or something, because soon there was a loud wailing siren. Eventually some workers came to the location of the siren and saw her standing there alone, and she was reunited later with her mother. The mystery woman was right. My grandma wasn't mad, and she was just thankful to have my mom back unharmed and safe. My mom told my grandma what happened. My grandma went to guest services, so that she could ask to speak to the woman who worked there that helped her daughter, so that she could thank her. There was obviously some employees that were brown-eyed, brown-haired women, but all of them denied being the woman in question. When my grandma mentioned the ride this took place at, the faces of the staff she was talking to visibly changed and went white, and they became very tight-lipped and didn't talk to my grandma anymore, so my grandma just left. Back at the entrance of the park, as my mom, her brother, and my grandma were going to leave, my mom happened to look at the corkboard from earlier, and she says she will never forget that moment. Right there, on the corkboard, was a photo of the face that she had met earlier. She pointed out to my grandma saying, "That's the lady." My grandma went over to the photo and read the words that accompanied the photo. She looked troubled, and then turned to my mom and said nervously, "This isn't funny. Let's go." My mom didn't find out until she was older and grandma told her, but apparently, that photo and text were a memorial to a worker that died weeks before. The reason that the park had initially closed, and the ride was taken out of operation. Because of this event, grandma had apparently done a small amount of research on the woman, by asking around, and word has it, while the ride was doing its up and down, she apparently tripped over some cables or wires, and ended up slipping partially under the ride, as it was on its way down to the ground. She was crushed to death. Personally, I don't know what to think. I'm not mentioning the park or the woman's name publicly, but trust me that I searched myself to see if I could verify anything. But I can't find any info online about it. It was so long ago and the internet is really new comparatively. So I guess that's not all too surprising that there are things that just aren't on it. That's the story though. You can take it or leave it on whether it was a ghost or not. And for what it's worth, my grandma insists that my mom must have seen the photo coming in and imagined the event, or had mistaken another worker for her. My mom was very young after all, and maybe the worker didn't come forward because she didn't want to get in trouble for pulling an alarm or something. My uncle doesn't remember any of this trip whatsoever. You ask my mom though, and she'll tell you she would bet her bottom dollar that the spirit of that woman came to her that day. She's certain of it. If you've ever been downtown, You may have seen a small building sandwiched between what used to be the courthouse and an abandoned storage unit. Yeah, well, it's a secondhand bookstore called The Printing Press. The sign above the door is too faded to read though, so everyone calls it Dalton's. Jerry Dalton is the owner, a 62-year-old chain smoker from Tennessee. Nevertheless, if you came inside, you'd notice how cramped the space is. There are books on tables, on shelves, in corners, and even on window stools. Then there's the musty smell of old books, and I mean old books. I swear some of these books must have been around when Jefferson was in office. That's how the store manages to get enough business to stay afloat. The books are damn near antique, the kind no other store has. And finally, you will most likely see a tall and thin woman in her 20s, with black hair covering her ears, and a complexion so pale, you can't look at her for very long. Yeah, that's me. The name's Chloe. I've been working there since high school, and I don't see myself calling it quits anytime soon. If there's one thing that's scarce around here, it's help. We used to have about 8 employees, but one by one they stopped coming into work, and one by one, we found their mutilated bodies at random places in the store. Except for Kim. A customer found her severed head on the cult shelf, and thought it was a Halloween decoration. I told Jerry multiple times to hire a paranormal investigator, but he calls me paranoid. He said there are no haunted places, and that it's all superstition. When I heard those words, I looked at him confusedly. Alright, I said. I'll give you that, but what about God and Jesus and heaven and hell? You talk about that stuff constantly. How is that any different from believing in wayward spirits? He told me to get back to work. But this isn't about Jerry. No, this story happened a week ago. It was about 6 o'clock, if I remember correctly. I was at the front desk updating inventory into the computer when I heard a thud upstairs. Max was upstairs shelving books at the time. "You alright, Max?" I hollered. There was no response. I shrugged it off as Max dropping a box of books, and thought no more about it. That is, until I heard another several loud thuds. I sighed deeply and trudged upstairs. I found Max on a stool putting up a couple books on the top shelf. A box of books that was on the cart next to him. "What the hell?" I asked, rolling my eyes. "What the hell what?" He replied, his brow furrowing. "Those loud noises." I answered. "What loud noises?" I looked deep into his eyes. He slowly got down from the stool, took out 3 more books, and shoved them on the middle shelf. We didn't break eye contact the whole time. I voluntarily coughed to break the silence. Alright, just be careful. We don't want employees with broken necks. I turned around and walked back downstairs. Max was one of those guys who hated to be supervised. He almost never talked to Jerry, and didn't come to the monthly business meetings. I didn't know him well, in other words. Jerry didn't say anything about Max, though. Jerry was lenient, perhaps overly so. When I got back to the front desk, I heard another 3 or 4 thuds. I rubbed my temples and did my best to forget about it. By this point it must have been 6:30. The store was silent for the next 30 minutes, which was enough time to finish inventory. When I decided I'd walk around the store and straighten up the merchandise, I did that for another 15 minutes. That's when I heard 6 louder thuds followed by a high-pitched scream. It felt like my ears exploded. "Max?" I yelled as I jogged upstairs. But when I got to where Max had been earlier, he was gone. The box on top of the cart and the stool were exactly where I last saw them, though. I searched the upstairs and couldn't find him. Then I went downstairs. He wasn't there either. And finally to the parking lot out back. His car was still parked in its usual spot. Now I was puzzled. Max may have been antisocial, but he hadn't left work without alerting Jerry or me. He wasn't that kind of employee. So since I couldn't leave the store unattended, I did the next best thing. I called his cell phone. He didn't answer. At that, I called Jerry, who wasn't at the store at the time. "Yellow?" he asked in his usual southern drawl. "Jerry, thank God I got in touch with you. Max has gone missing. What should I do?" My shaky voice stammered into the phone. I'd say wait for him to turn up. You'll find him eventually." "Yeah, I'll find him dead. Maybe I should call the police, or maybe I should..." "Chloe," snapped Jerry. For the love of Jesus Christ inside us all, please shut your mouth. Everything will be fine. Oh, absolutely, I retorted. Everything went fine for Edgar and Kim and Lauren. Must I go on? Jerry growled. Chloe, accidents happen, you know. 7 accidents in a short time span? It's possible, Chloe. Now please, don't start yapping about the supernatural again. I've gotta go. The church dinner won't be cooked by itself. And don't forget to lock up at closing time. Then he hung up on me. I tossed my phone onto the desk, cursing Jerry for being so clueless, and cursing myself for the powerlessness. What was I to do? After all, for all I knew, I was going to be the next victim. I decided, since there was no customer in sight, to go upstairs and look much more thoroughly. Out of caution, I walked up the stairs very slowly and quietly, occasionally calling out for Max in a soft voice. But I'm not sure why I bothered with all that. Ghosts can see you after all, even if you can't see them. But I couldn't be sure it was a ghost. A vampire, maybe? No, none of the victims had punctured necks. What about a werewolf? No, that can't be it either. You'd think I might have found some hair scattered around. My mind was functioning at 1,000,000 miles a minute, with dozens of other possibilities, but none of them seemed to make any sense with what I knew. So I tried to put it out of my mind, and looked for signs of Max. I checked the windows. They were all locked. I looked at the hardwood floor carefully for any scratches or signs of a struggle. I couldn't find any. That's when I heard the thuds again. I jumped, but stayed as quiet as possible. The thuds seemed to be coming from above the ceiling. Above the ceiling, I thought to myself. I don't think there's anything up there but mice. And yet, those thuds could not be made by a mouse. I tiptoed back downstairs to look for Jerry's crowbar. I did my best not to mess with too much stuff in his office. I didn't want him to know I'd been looking around. He always told the employees to stay out of his office. But this was an emergency. The crowbar, it turns out, was in his liquor cabinet. I was a little disturbed at that, but this wasn't the time to psychoanalyze Jerry. I needed to look for Max, and at the very least, figure out what's making that sound I've been hearing all evening. I think it was 7:30 by then. When I got back upstairs, I stood there in the same spot I'd heard the thuds. I couldn't hear them anymore, but I knew all I needed to do was wait. I waited like a cheetah stalking a gazelle. My whole body was drenched in sweat, and I felt very gross, but that was only a small price to pay if I could find Max. The thuds finally came, and they were directly above my head. I got Max's stool, stood on it, and used the crowbar with unprecedented ease. I guess it's hard to know what you can do when you're pee your pants scared. I took the ceiling tile off methodically, so I didn't damage it, and slow enough so I could grab it with my hands and set it on the floor. I stood on the stool just staring at the newly made hole in the ceiling. I didn't know if I was scared or just questioning what I was doing in the first place. Sometimes I wonder if I had any idea what I was looking for, because I sure don't in retrospect. I guess I was on edge. My breathing was heavy though silent, and I even felt a little nauseous. Anyway, I finally got the nerve to look into the ceiling's hole. It was, as you'd expect, pitch black, and I could barely see anything. I shrugged my shoulders in relief, but when I turned to look at the other side, I was greeted by the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. I screamed louder than I thought was humanly possible, and tumbled off the stool and crashed onto the floor. I was so petrified that I was stuck lying in that spot. I stared up at the hole once more. I was certain I was startled by a human face, a very disgusting and deformed human face. But before I could meditate it, a few more thuds echoed from the hole. Then I heard the sound of something being dragged slowly and purposefully, as in my usual procedure in such scenarios. I closed my eyes and mumbled about wanting my mommy. My eyes involuntarily opened when I heard some large object dropped on the floor next to me. If I thought my scream before was loud, my second scream topped that by several decibels. I crawled backwards until I hit a wall. I was in denial of what I was seeing. It was Max. Well, or what was left of Max anyway. Half of his face was just muscle and bone, and his chest cavity was entirely ripped open. The body was also missing a leg, his right leg. The rest of his body had numerous bite marks, scratches, and cuts. culprit soon dropped down. This time, I didn't scream. I was too shocked. The creature's face looked human, except its nose was flat. The ears were pointed and the eyes were large, and with diamond-shaped pupils. Its mouth was full of very sharp teeth. The body was also very human with long arms and legs, except it was crouched like a cat. The skin was a light blue, and it had wings folded at its side. Our eyes met, and my heart skipped 2 or 3 beats, and I almost forgot to breathe. It stood on its hind legs, and started walking towards me while its tongue twitched, and it cried out like a hawk. I was thinking about all the people that'd be at my funeral, and the list was, I confess, quite short. I was too much of a workaholic to have a boyfriend, and I was an only child. There was my dad, an uncle, and my maternal grandmother. You have some pretty strange thoughts when you think you're about to die. But then I remembered the mace I had in my pocket, and I thought, I don't want to die. I waited until the creature's face was inches from mine, and I sprayed it like my life was dependent on it, because it kinda was. And I always thought mace was made for muggers. I should market some monster-specific mace. I bet I'd make a killing, but I got a C- in high school chemistry. Oh well, a girl can dream. Where was I? Oh yeah, the mace. The creature howled in irritation as it shook its head, which gave me enough time to rush downstairs. I pushed books behind me as I ran in the hopes of creating obstacles. I looked behind me and saw the creature quickly jumping onto walls to try to pounce on me. I was heading towards the door, until I felt something grab my leg and I hit the floor. I looked behind me, and saw the creature's spindly fingers around my ankles. It hissed at me, and bent over to try to start chowing down. Instinctually, I swung my hand and knocked it across the head. It fell over in pain. I suddenly backtracked upstairs. Remembering the crowbar, I grabbed it and hid behind a bookcase. I knew that wouldn't last long, but there was nowhere else to go. I heard the familiar thuds, and soon saw the thing above me upside down on the ceiling. It lunged, and I ran out of the way. I slammed into the bookcase, which fell sideways, and crashed into the next bookcase, which did the same thing like several dominoes. I was almost crushed. The creature at this point was furious. I hid behind one of the bookcases that wasn't toppled over, when all I heard was silence for about 30 seconds. I slowly tiptoed forward and peeked around the corner. The creature was there, and he spit some green mush at me. I ducked, thankfully, and saw the mush hit the wall. It bled right through the wall in seconds. I had to climb over bookcases to get back to the stairs. The creature spitting in my direction and creating holes in everything from the floor to the fallen bookcases. I was trying to rationally understand what to do, but I couldn't think at all. All that was active at that point was the lizard brain, which said I had to fight him off. I finally reached the front door, but I didn't rush outside as was my original plan. I slowly turned around to see the creature standing feet from me. It took a step forward, and I swung the crowbar like a baseball bat. It slapped the creature, which jumped in the air, flapping its wings violently. I slid underneath it and hit it again on the back of the head. Unexpectedly, the creature grabbed my arm and bit deep into it. I cried in agony and used my good arm to start punching it in the head. When it let go, I kicked it with my foot, which caused it to fall onto its stomach. My arm was bleeding like a waterfall, but I couldn't do anything about it. The odd thing is that I didn't even feel the pain in that moment. Maybe it was the adrenaline. "I'm done with you," I said to the creature, but really I was saying it more to myself, because I doubt the creature understood English. The creature got on all 4 legs and started flapping its wings again, until it was in the air in front of me. It let out a loud noise before coming at me. I jumped right at it, and plunged the crowbar right into its left eye. The creature fell to the ground, its wing trying to cover the wound. I got on my knees, gave it one final look before finding the crowbar a home in its heart. The creature immediately stopped moving. I stood up, walked a few feet, and everything went black. I woke up in a room with almost blinding fluorescent lights. When my vision managed to focus, I realized I was in a comfortable bed with an IV in one arm and heavy bandaging on the other. My eyes started darting around, and I saw Jerry sitting in a chair near the end of the bed. He was looking at some trashy magazine. When he realized I woke up, he threw the magazine across the room. I wasn't reading that magazine. Jerry whined. It's just that. Don't judge me, Chloe. My head was throbbing. What? Where am I? You're in a hospital. A customer walked in around 8:30 last night and found you unconscious on the floor with books all over the place, he explained. When he said that, all the memories came flooding back over me. I sat up. Jerry, I found Max's body and there was this humanoid bat-like creature and I... Hush, Chloe. You need to rest. You lost a lot of blood. I don't know how in the world you made such a mess, but you're currently my only employee, so it's not like I'm gonna fire you or anything. What about Max? I questioned. You didn't find his body? What about that bat creature? Chloe, please, hold on a second. I was there and a customer was there, and even a couple policemen were there. We checked the entire place, and we saw no Max, and of course we didn't find any bat creatures. You need to stop reading those horror stories. Oh, and don't think it's just me here. I called your dad. He's been here with me, but he just went to the bathroom a minute ago. I nodded and let my head hit the pillow. I decided that I shouldn't argue with Jerry when I was recovering. Thankfully, my injury wasn't that bad, and I was out of the hospital the next day. But I didn't go back to work for a couple days. Jerry almost never gave me vacation time, so I gladly took it off when he offered. Anyway, that's it for this story. There are plenty more, because the printing press seems to attract everything from aliens to sentient robots. But I'm writing this on my lunch break, and it's about time to get back to work. Besides, there's some girl floating around the store moaning something about Satan rising again, so I should probably go check that out. Plus, we just got a new shipment of books that needs to be sorted, so I'll talk to you later. Sometimes, facing our fears is simply not worth the consequences. My name is Kevin and I'm a 26-year-old medical student, currently in my 3rd year. I have always viewed doctors as some sort of superheroes, able to rescue dying people and bring them back to life. Becoming a doctor has been my dream since I began to understand a fraction of the world around me, albeit superficially. Nothing worth of media attention has happened since I started studying here, but a week ago, there was an incident at the medical school. For unknown reasons, the news hasn't reported about it yet. Thus, I feel obliged to write about it here. There was a fellow student named Michael. We were good friends and understood each other very well. His wiry frame measured at least 6 feet in height, yet he was a quiet, rather shy person who didn't have many friends. However, that didn't seem to bother him too much. He was an excellent student, and made his way to the top of the dean's list several times. After classes, he would walk the same route to my dorm, and talk about anything under the sun, from how we would change the world with new inventions to disappointment with current political leaders. We have grown so close to each other that we share our innermost dreams and secrets with one another without fear of ridicule. Over the years that I spent with him, I learned that he was claustrophobic. The size of the room in which he was didn't matter, but the mere fact that he was trapped was enough to give him a panic attack. He has seen a consultant over many years, and his fear has reduced to a minimum. Yet he wasn't satisfied. One day, after classes, he suddenly told me that he's seen a YouTube video about people who faced their fears head-on, and eliminated them forever, and how inspired he was by their newfound quality of life. I've never seen him that happy and enthusiastic before. Knowing that Michael has always had a rather melancholic disposition, he told me that he wants to do the same for himself, and maybe record a video of him recounting his experience and post it on YouTube. At around midnight, he called me, and said he was waiting downstairs. I snuck out, careful not to be caught violating the curfew, and met him outside. He asked me to accompany him to the deserted college, and lock him in the anatomy lab. I asked him if he had lost his mind. I knew how such approaches can backfire horribly. Don't worry, it'll go away after 10 minutes, and then we'll go home. He reassured me. He didn't ask his therapist beforehand, saying he doesn't trust him, because he hasn't lost his fear despite spending years on therapy. Reluctantly, I followed him while berating him the whole time, about his decision, and trying to convince him not to follow through. Michael seemed unfazed. Nothing could dissuade him from his adventure. I couldn't let him go alone. Careful not to be spotted on CCTV, we stole the keys from the night shift security guard's office while he was making his rounds, and went to the basement where the lab is located. I made a desperate last-ditch attempt to dissuade Michael from going in. Friends help each other to become a better person, right? I'm trying to become one, and you don't want me to. What kind of friend are you? Reluctantly, I gave him the keys and he unlocked the door. He told me not to open it until 10 minutes later, no matter what happens. He went in and shut the door, taking the keys with him. The door had a second lock, which could only be opened with a key from either side, rendering me powerless should he suffer from a heart attack. The audible click of the lock sliced through the silence, like a hot knife through butter. I could hear him hyperventilating, and his rapid breathing grew fainter. As he walked away from the door to the other end of the room, I told him I had had enough, and I'm getting a spare key to let him out. He yelled for me to shut up and leave him alone. He was sobbing. His sobs grew progressively louder, and mutated into blood-curdling screams of agony. I yelled at him to come out, but he wouldn't respond. A loud crash came from within, as he probably threw equipment across the room, followed by more loud sobbing, more clanking of steel, crashing of glass, and cracking of breaking wood accompanied by loud sobs and wild screams. I couldn't take it anymore, and sprinted down the hallway, up the stairs and straight to the security guard's office. I didn't care that we got caught now. In the hallway leading to the entrance, I ran into him, and told him what happened while trying to catch my breath. We ran to the lab entrance, and I called out Michael's name. Silence. I called his name again, and asked him if he was okay, and that the security guard is here to let him out. Silence. The guard finally found the key and unlocked the door. The lights weren't working. Michael must have smashed the lamps as the floor was covered in glass, illuminating the room with his flashlight. The security guard went ahead to examine the room. Overturned dissecting tables everywhere, medical equipment strewn about. From the other end of the room, we heard faint sobbing accompanied by a strange noise. It sounded like something chewing. The security guard shone his light beam in the direction the noise came from, and gasped at the grisly sight. Before us, on the floor, knelt Michael stark naked, bent over a cadaver and chewing at its face. He stopped abruptly as the light beam struck his face, and slowly looked upward. His eyes had the look of a feral animal, and his mouth slowly contorted to a grin. Or better, what was left of it. Michael had cut away his lips, exposing his gums and teeth, and his face was smeared in coagulated blood. I realized that what I heard wasn't sobbing, it was giggling. With an almost inhumanly fast movement, he lunged at the security guard from his kneeling position and tackled him to the ground. I turned around and ran, the screams and Michael's maniacal laugh following me through the hallway. My lungs were burning and my heart close to exploding, yet I pushed myself to reach the exit. It was locked. I heard unnaturally fast running coming from the other side of the hallway, so I ran to the computer room and locked myself in. Suddenly a loud thump shook the room, followed by another one, as Michael tried to break down the door while laughing like a maniac. I wonder how he could muster up the kind of strength to cause the metal door to budge. Fearful of making a sound, I cowered on a computer desk at the far end of the room. I heard Michael sniffing at the door, and then it was quiet. I figured that he may want to lure me out by keeping quiet, so I decided to stay in the room. I quietly dozed off when a noise startled me awake. Something crawled with insane speed through the air duct on the ceiling. I looked up and saw Michael's mutilated grin behind the grid of the vent. I ran towards the door, unlocked it, and sprinted down the hallway, while hearing the grid covering the air vent dropping to the floor. I finally managed to find another exit door with the feral Michael in pursuit. I kept running, the adrenaline preventing me from passing out. He didn't follow me outside. I could see the faint glow of the coming sunrise on the horizon and raced towards it. Completely exhausted, I called an Uber from my dorm room, packed all my things, and left for home. I quit medical school, much to the disapproval of my parents. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. Good that we had to move far away from this place, and I am currently finishing up my studies at another medical school. Michael and the security guard were never found, yet stories of people going missing at the medical school and around the area, and their mutilated remains found in the sewers are circulating the internet. Students and faculty members at the medical school report of strange noises at night, of something crawling or slithering insanely fast through air ducts and crawl spaces, of faint giggling in closets, of roaring laughter coming from the sewers. I don't believe in the supernatural, but I can't wrap my head around what has happened to Michael. I wonder how much of what was left of him could still be considered human. Just east of El Reno and west of Yukon, there's an old dirt road that runs parallel of I-40. It's old and overrun, and to be honest, I love it. Not because it creeps me out, but because I love that feeling I get just coasting through the countryside in the dead of night. It's like a big middle finger to those who refuse to go there after dark, because it doesn't faze me. Earlier, after I got off work, I decided to take that route again on the way home. Just crank up some Stone Temple Pilots and roll the windows down, and enjoy the cruise. But on this night, things were different. A lot different. I slowed down and tuned down the STP for a bit. The droning of I-40 just a soft hum at this point. I could see the lights from the semis dimmed down to a soft glow. I was coming up on the part of the road that divided a bunch of old, gnarled trees, which covered an abandoned farmhouse. I killed the headlights and let off the gas, slowing down and listening to the sounds of the night. I kept watching my rear view, in case someone came up to me. At first, there was nothing but the moonlit dirt road. Once I got parallel to the old farmhouse, I saw it. A blue shimmer in the middle of the road, several yards behind me. I stopped the truck, killed the engine, and turned the lights on, and watched for a few minutes. It shimmered like a bright body of water, only it was thinner at the top and deeper at the bottom. I watched it, squinting at it, trying to make sense of it as it shimmered and floated. It began to lift off the road and hold position. I was trying to decide whether or not to get back in my truck when I began to feel light in my head. My eyes began to water while staring at this thing, and I felt like I was about to vomit. I gripped the bed of the truck to keep from sliding down to my knees when it turned back on. The stereo fired a brief burst of static before STP's down began blaring. The full volume of the screeching guitars, this shimmering apparition, the smell of the exhaust, the nausea, it was all too much and I fainted. When I came to, everything was different. I woke up in a gray landscape that looked like the aftermath of an apocalyptic blast. The sky was covered in gray clouds that seemed to get darker off in the distance. My nausea was gone, so I stood up and saw that everything was destroyed. The only landmarks I noticed were the old farmhouse and a partially collapsed overpass dangling precariously over the interstate. There were no trees or any sort of greenery in sight. I noticed then that my truck was gone too. No surprise, with the way things looked out here. I knew that it'd be asking for too much of a miracle. I began walking in the direction of El Reno, hoping to make heads or tails along the way of my situation when I heard it. Talking, coming from the farmhouse. I immediately became apprehensive. It's an old, busted-up farmhouse in the middle of a dead land. That's perfect reasoning to just run. But if there's someone else out there, maybe I could figure out just what happened. I walked up to the old house, the talking growing louder as I got closer. Only when I stopped through the faded white doorway did I realize I had bitten off more than I could chew. "Come," a voice whispered. I froze. "No," was all I could manage to say. I felt my body freeze into place, and I couldn't help but feel like a prey who has caught a faint whiff of its predator. "Come, friend," it said again. "No," I repeated, and began to step backward through the front door. Right as I was almost home free, I felt the door slam behind me. I ended up backing into a surprisingly solid wooden door. There was silence for a few moments. Then I heard something crash downstairs. I stayed silent. Then came a loud thump. Silence, then thump. It was silent for a bit. Then the voice spoke up again. "Come here, friend. Come home," it said. I turned around and began to shimmy and pull at the door, shaking it violently, kicking it, hoping against hope that the fucking thing would just open. The door broke in half and I went spilling onto the porch. Immediately I got to my feet and began running, only to turn around and watch as a single leg, long and spindly like a black widow's, emerged from the front door. I watched with revulsion, as it extended farther and farther out the door. My nausea came back as I heard a cacophony of crashing from inside the house. I saw something large and blacker than sin begin to fill the windows as my footing became wobbly. I tried to turn, but my legs felt like stone. I pulled and pulled, trying to run, instead falling on my face and blacking out. When I came to, it was dark, with the headlights from my truck illuminating the landscape. The trees and grass were back, as was the clear, moonlit nights, and the droning from I-40. I was back. I got up to my feet and looked down the road to see if the shimmer was still there, and thankfully it wasn't. I walked over to the driver's side in order to get in, wondering why I just went and left my truck running. When I grabbed my door handle, once I realized what I grabbed, the door handle began to yield and small, spindly appendages began to emerge, waving around at first. It took me a brief second to respond, but I pulled my hand back, right as the appendages tried to close over my hand. I jumped back, holding my hands as if it were wounded, and looked at the truck, not believing what I had just saw. My truck had just tried to grab me. Something has gone terribly wrong here. I'm in the process of moving, mostly due to what I saw while out with a bunch of friends. I'm 23 and pretty stout. I look fat, but there's a lot of muscle under the blubber. But I digress. My friends and I went up into the mountains to drink, party, and be pretty toxic. I was supposed to be the designated driver for my group of friends. I don't have a thirst for alcohol, unless something tragic happens, and I have to answer the call of the bottle. Gabe, my best friend, was pretty shit-faced already, and managed to convince the group that we should go up to the old mines, where a collapse happened, and play with a Ouija board. I wasn't really able to say anything since I was outnumbered by my drunk friends, and didn't want to let them go out into the dark forest without me. We headed up the trail leading to an old mine that collapsed and killed a lot of good people. There were lots of stories about this mine in particular, most notably that the men had unearthed an ungodly creature that ate people and had no eyes. I thought it was bullcrap, but you don't know how unnerving that stuff becomes when you're near it in the middle of the night. Gabe dug around in his backpack for a while, presumably looking for his Ouija board. Don't ask me why a 22-year-old brings a Ouija board to a party, because I still don't know why he brought one. I watched everyone start playing with it. Screw that, I thought to myself. I'm not going to get myself haunted by some old miner. After a bit of drunken shenanigans and fake movements, Gabe decided that there was no ghost and that we should venture into the mines. Even while drunk, some of our friends disliked that idea and said they'd rather not, but again, like I had before, they were outvoted. Most of the group took a heavy swig of liquor courage and ventured into the mines. I hesitated and even thought about drinking some myself. I held off and joined them in their expedition, walking down the old moist tunnels and kicking loose rocks. I thought it was really strange. Stones shouldn't be that loose, and some of it was coal. Why would the miners leave loose coal on the floor like that? I don't know, and at this point I don't care. We got down deep into the belly of the dark mine, illuminating the damp hole with little more than our phones. The tunnels were filled with drunken laughter about the wet squishing sounds of our shoes against the floor. Someone went to go take a piss. I think it was Brian, but I'm not sure. And then Gabe started talking about what was rumored to have happened in those mines, which creeped me out more than it should have. He came back to the group without his pants on, and immediately I could tell he had sobered up quite a bit. Through some loud, heavy laughter, Gabe asked him what he had done with his pants. My guess was he had shat himself. He started to talk in a shaky and hushed voice. I couldn't hear him over the laughter. I knew he was talking, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. After everyone calmed down, it happened. He went to say what he had said again, but all he did was scream. Any buzz he had left was dead when Tom screamed too, followed by a loud and hard snap. I looked over and thought I was gonna crap myself. This horrible lake thing snapped another guy in the group's back like a twig and started to eat him. This isn't textbook, it swallowed him whole crap. This thing was sucking the meat off his neck. Everyone ran. We practically climbed over one another to get out of there. The whole time we were running, we could hear the sounds of that thing, ripping meat off the man and snapping bones to drink the marrow, like some kind of demented milkshake. I didn't see much of it, but I saw enough to where it haunts my nightmares. I can still hear it ripping meat off of him. I don't know who the guy was, and none of the people I asked did either. All I can hope for is that whatever God he believes in led him to a better place. I can't forget it. The pain creature with a pretzel for a spine holding the man like a balloon animal, while eating his neck like corn on the cob. This isn't something I can describe lightly. I saw a man being eaten alive. You can't unsee something that awful. I don't care how hard of a man or a woman you are. Jay counted heads, and we were one shorter than when we entered. I was thankful it only got one man. We called 911 after letting everyone know what happened. The police searched down there for what felt like an eternity. They didn't find any creature. All they found was the man's face with deep punctures in it. When they showed us, I gagged and threw up. The car ride home was tense. I didn't blame Gabe for what happened there. How could he have known? No one could have. I'm writing this as a warning. Do not go into the Appalachian Mountains. No matter how many of you there are, it will get one, and they will die. I haven't told this story in over 10 years. No one believed me when it happened. They thought I was going crazy. Honestly, I thought so too until I found this subreddit. Now I know I didn't imagine any of it. I was in college at the time, living on campus a good few hours away from my hometown. I'd planned a bus trip back to my parents like I always did when I was homesick. This time, I was extra excited about going back, as it was Thanksgiving weekend. Nothing like a homemade turkey dinner to cheer you up, am I right? Unfortunately, I got stuck in traffic on my way to the station, and missed my stupid bus. I cursed myself for always being last minute, knowing full well it was my fault. Looking at the schedule on my phone, I realized that the bus had been the last one going to my hometown for the day. I'd have to wait until the morning to catch the next one. It was past 8 p.m., so the ticket counter was already closed. Even the convenience store selling stale sandwiches and magazines had been shuttered for the night. I normally get tickets in the afternoon, so it was weird to see the bus station so empty and dark. There were still a few passengers scattered around the benches lined up in the atrium, but they were all quiet and kept to themselves. The dim lights gave off an eerie, post-apocalyptic vibe, but it had this weird, cozy feeling to it. It seemed like the perfect place to work on my economics essay that was due the week after Thanksgiving. The atrium was quiet and spacious, quite the opposite of my cramped dorm room. Plus, I knew my roommates had friends over for the evening, and I didn't feel like going back there right away. Her friends were super annoying. I took a spot in front of the big window, overlooking the loading dock. A couple of buses were still in the middle of loading passengers. People milled about in the cold November evening as they waited to get on. I watched a driver ram their luggage in the gaping compartments on the side of the bus, feeling annoyed that I wouldn't get to ride home that night like I was expecting. At that point in time, I really enjoyed taking these big buses with their plush seats, watching the scenery from high above the road. It used to be soothing. I don't think of it like that anymore, that's for sure. Crazy how your perception can change in a snap. I worked on my essay for a while, completely in the zone. I don't know how much time passed, to be honest, maybe 2 or 3 hours. When I finally lifted my eyes off of my laptop screen, the loading dock was empty. Fog had drifted in, swirling in the streetlights. There was no one else left in the building, and it somehow made the place look even darker. It felt wrong for me to be there all alone, as if I was doing something illegal, like trespassing or whatever. Didn't bus stations close at some point? I didn't want to get caught by a guard, so I quickly shoved my laptop in my bag. I was ready to go when bright headlights blinded me from the other side of the window. A bus was pulling in, its engine growling, dispersing the fog around it. I shielded my eyes, surprised that there were still buses at this time. I should have just shrugged and left. I wish I had. But for some reason, I got curious and kept looking, expecting to see passengers coming out of the bus. Maybe I just wanted to feel less alone and out of place. No one came out. I took a few steps forward, squinting my eyes against the light. I could see a silhouette in the driver's seat, and above his head, a display showing the stops on his route in blocky red letters. It flashed to Bellamont, and my heart leaped. That was my hometown. I rushed outside and walked up to the bus. The door was still closed, but I could see the driver through a narrow pane of glass. He was looking straight ahead, and light above his seat fighting with the shadows under his hat. I lifted a fist to knock on the door, but hesitated. A feeling of dread took over me for no reason. I felt it course through my veins, starting from my arms and spreading through my chest, like a fevered chill. I looked around the loading dock, but the night was so dark that I couldn't see much past the series of illuminated parking spots in front of the building. For a second, I almost felt like I was stranded on an island in the middle of a void. Like there was nothing else beyond what I could see. It's hard to explain, but my head spun for a second, almost like vertigo. I remember thinking that I was just tired. I told myself this was my last chance to get home that night, and it would be silly not to try. The thought of sleeping in my queen-size bed was enough to pull me out of this strange, dizzying feeling, and knock on the door. I still hate myself for it. The driver looked down at me from behind the glass, his entire face pinched in a frown. "Are you going to Belmont?" I yelled through the door. He didn't react at all at first, as if he hadn't heard me. Just as I was about to repeat myself, he nodded slowly. I tried my best smile. "Can I get in?" Again, he just stared at me, not making a move. I should have taken the hint and left, but I really wanted to get home. I fished for my ticket in the front pocket of my backpack and plastered it on the glass. "I missed the 8 p.m. bus. Is there any chance you can take me in?" I waited a beat and added, "Please?" He kept on staring for a few more seconds, just enough to give me the creeps, but he finally pulled on the lever to open the door. His movements were slow, as if he was drowning in sludge, and any shift of his muscles took all of his energy. I stood there with my backpack, the fog rising through the open door. I waited for him to confirm that it was okay for me to get on board, but he said nothing, just kept staring. My smile faltered. Hesitantly, I grabbed onto the railing and took a step up. He didn't protest, so I just hopped the last few steps, mumbling a quick "thank you" as I passed him. I made my way to a seat towards the back, relieved to have made it on board. Just like the station, the bus was completely empty, but I remember being happy about that. I'd had my fair share of overcrowded bus rides, so having a bus all to myself for once sounded like a dream. I'd be able to get some sleep in, I thought. How stupid of me. I jumped when the bus hissed to life, the door closing with a screech. I scoffed at how on edge I was, and told myself to relax. I got my earbuds out as the bus pulled out from the loading dock and settled in my seat, getting ready for the ride. By the time we got on the highway, I was already dozing off to some random chill mix I'd found on YouTube. When I woke up, something was off. I don't really know how to explain it. It was that feeling of dread and anxiety, filling every inch of my chest and radiating through my back. Like when you're alone at home and you turn off all the lights, but you feel a presence behind you at every turn. My earbuds had fallen off while I slept, so I could hear the rumbling of the road underneath the wheels. Other than that, everything was dead quiet. I got up to stretch a bit, looking around the darkened bus. There were still no passengers other than me, and yet I had a distinct sensation that I wasn't alone at the back of the bus. I scratched my neck, trying to get rid of the chilled feeling at the base of my head. I glanced at the bus driver. He was looking straight ahead at the road, his arms barely moving as he manned the steering wheel. Maybe I was just creeped out by his presence. That's when I heard it, a subtle scratch, like a nail on leather, or maybe a claw. It sounded really close and far at the same time, and I couldn't pinpoint a direction where it was coming from. It lasted maybe half a second, but it was strange enough to get my full attention. I whipped my head around, wondering if some kind of animal had hitched a ride, but everything was still quiet, unmoving. I stood there, all my muscles tensing, waiting to hear if the sound would come back. It didn't, so I sat down, a little more unnerved. I remember being terrified that a bat had found its way on the bus, as if that would have been the worst case scenario. Now I wish it had been a bat, or even 100 bats. The noise happened again a few times over the next hour, but I could never pinpoint the source. It was driving me nuts. Then it dawned on me that maybe there was an animal stuck in the bathroom. That was the only place I couldn't really see. I didn't particularly want to come face to face with a rabid bat, but I also really needed to know where that weird noise was coming from. I made my way down the aisle, passing a few rows of seats. At some point, a dark smudge appeared in the periphery of my vision to my right, but I didn't dwell on it. I absentmindedly rubbed my eye and kept going. When I reached the bathroom door, I placed my ear on it and waited. Nothing. The green vacant sign near the handle was lit up, but I still knocked and waited another beat or two. Still nothing. I pushed open the door with my foot, not wanting any skin showing part of me inside if there was a bat in there. The hard plastic creaked a little, sending creepy shivers down my spine. I jumped when the bathroom light turned on automatically and almost ran away, but managed to calm myself down. I looked inside the small space, inspecting the yellowed toilet seat, the mirror speckled with water drops, and the tiny sink from afar. Nothing moved in there. Nothing was alive that I could see. I removed my foot and the door snapped closed. Relieved, I turned around to make my way back to my seat. I noticed again a dark smudge at the corner of my vision, but this time it was on the other side. I blinked hard, wondering if I had an eyelash stuck in my left eye. I kept walking, rubbing my eye until it burned. That's when I heard another noise. This time it was clearly coming from behind me, and it was more like plastic slowly sliding across the surface. I stopped and turned around in the aisle. The first thing I noticed was that the smudge was back, but on the right side again. The second thing was that the vacant sign on the bathroom door had shifted to occupied. Warmth drained from my whole body. I stood there frozen. Only a few moments ago, there had been no one in the bathroom and no one behind me. I stood at the door long enough to notice that the dark smudge in the periphery of my vision was swirling slowly, like gray milk on a black coffee. Yet every time I tried to look at it directly, it disappeared. I did it a few times as I started panicking, looking straight at it. Nothing. Looked away, there it was. Again and again, very fast, unable to stop myself. I wanted to examine it so bad to understand what it was, but I just couldn't. I took a few steps back and realized the smudge was anchored in the same place, right above a seat a few rows down. My breath caught in my throat. I looked directly at the seat for a while, my heart beating in my ears. Everything looked normal, but when I finally dared to move my eyes away, the smudge reappeared in the periphery of my vision. Bigger, closer. A scream caught in my throat. I fumbled back, then ran to my seat, searching for my phone with trembling hands. I texted my mom, but there was no signal. We were on a stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, darkness surrounding us through the windows. The sudden feeling of being stranded and alone hit me so hard that it knocked the wind out of me. I looked towards the bus driver. He seemed completely unaware of what was happening at the back of the bus. I considered asking him to stop so that I could get off. Every cell in my body was telling me to run. Honestly, I wish I had listened. But my logical brain kicked in and pointed out that it was dangerous to walk on the side of the highway, in the dark, and that it would be no better out there in the night than in here. I convinced myself that I was just having a panic attack, and that I couldn't trust myself to make the right decision until I calmed down. So I sat down and closed my eyes, forcing myself to take breaths. I told myself that it was just an illusion, probably caused by the dim light reflecting on the window, or a weird shadow created by the seat. Nothing to worry about. And as for the bathroom sign, it must have slid when I let the door slam shut by itself. That was all. I reminded myself that in about 2 hours, I'd be safe and sound at the bus station in Belmont. I even imagined myself telling the story to my mom and laughing about it with her. She'd no doubt give me a logical reason for what had happened. She was good at calming me down when I was claustrophized like that. All I had to do was sit tight until then, and try not to think about it. I bit my nails obsessively for the next 30 minutes, trying to concentrate on an ebook I had downloaded on my phone. It was pointless, as no words really made it through the thick fog of anxiety in my mind. And then the bus rocked, violently. I screamed as I was shoved towards the window, hitting my head on it. I hadn't even had time to react before the bus rocked backward, slamming my body against the seat in front of me. I grabbed a hold of the headrest and stood up, calling out to the driver. "What's happening?" It took me a second to realize that there was now a dark smudge directly to my left. I whimpered, looked straight at it to make it disappear, and I looked back towards the bathroom to see if the shadow was still there. It was, and there was another one to the left as well, swirling by the corner of my eyes, bigger than the other two. The bus rocked again, almost making me fall. I yelled at the bus driver, panic strangling my voice into a shrill. The shadow across the aisle from me seemed to grow larger. I closed my eyes, my entire body tensing with fear, then ran towards the front of the bus. I didn't look back, but I swear I could feel the shadows behind me, looming like a spider crawling up my spine. When I reached the driver, I put my hand on his shoulder. "Something is wrong. Please stop the bus." He didn't react. I moved to his side to get his attention, and froze. His face had disappeared, leaving behind a featureless head, like an egg-shaped sack of skin under a hat. His hands were still on the steering wheel, adjusting it slightly as if he was still consciously driving. The world spun, and my vision blackened for a moment. It took everything I had to will myself not to pass out. I grabbed onto the railing behind me, my legs wobbly. Outside, the bus's headlights illuminated a small portion of the road as it sped through the highway, looking eerily normal. Everything shook again, almost sending me flying down the stairs. Yet there was nothing outside that could cause the bus to rock so much. It was as if we were partly in the real world and partly outside of it. "You're not supposed to be here," said a voice coming from the driver. I snapped my head back towards him. He now had a face, but it was a grotesque excuse for a human being. His nose was crooked and asymmetrical. Both eyes looked different and weren't at the same height. His skin was deeply wrinkled, like that of an old lady. The whole thing looked strangely familiar in a horrifying way. "You shouldn't be here," the thing repeated, its voice womanly and almost soothing, a sharp contrast to its appearance. I suddenly realized why it looked so familiar. It was like a mix of my grandma and my mom. I recognized my grandma's favorite blue eyeshadow on a brown eye that looked like hers, the high cheekbone of my other grandma under her blue eye, and my mom's mole near the nose. It was as if the monster had tried to conjure up something I could relate to. "How do I get out?" I whispered, my vocal cords paralyzed by fear. The unblinking, unmoving face stared at me. "Get in the bathroom." The bus was now trembling and shaking like an unending earthquake. That's when the noise started. It was a deep, vibrating growl, barely audible. I felt it more than I heard it. But it grew, and morphed as it expanded. It was sometimes guttural, and sometimes more of a deep scratching, like a train's emergency brake. It got so loud that it felt like it was taking up space around me, pushing against my skin. I thought my brain would explode. "Now," yelled the thing driving the bus. I turned around, my palms pressed against my ears, and I saw them. All the shadows in my peripheral vision, maybe 10, 20 of them. Above them, balls of blinding lights descended, and sparks flew as they touched the shadows. My eyes darted from side to side as I tried to understand what was happening, but I could never focus on anything. Everything disappeared whenever I looked straight at it. Suddenly a shadow appeared to my right, taking up almost all my side vision. "Go." The voice sounded disembodied, more like an otherworldly screech than a human speech. So I closed my eyes and ran down the aisle. I opened them once or twice to see where I was going, but every time I did, the shadows would swallow my side vision, swirly tendrils extending towards me. At some point, I swear I felt one of them touch me. It was colder than I ever felt before. It was like being burned by the void. When I finally reached the bathroom, I pushed on the door, but it was still locked. As I battled with it, I could see shadows coming towards me from the corner of my eye, and balls of light clashing with them in the background. My brain couldn't make sense of what was happening. There was just so much noise, and shaking, and sparks and darkness. I started kicking and punching the door, desperate to get in, and managed to get it open. I rushed in and closed the door behind me, putting all my weight on it to keep it shut. The sound had become a permanent screech that vibrated in my brain and made me scream, my fingers shoved in my ears. I remember a violent shake, and feeling like the bus had been lifted from the ground, and then I blacked out. When I woke up, everything was quiet and dark. I first felt the asphalt against my cheek, the fresh air on my face. The air smelled like wet dirt. Relief. My backpack was on the ground next to me. I found my phone nearby. The screen was cracked, but it was still working, so I used it to shine a light around me. I was on the side of the highway, alone. There was nothing else but me and my stuff. No bus, no shadows, no lights. I walked a few miles until I found a signal, then called my mom to pick me up. I told her the entire thing, from start to finish. She threatened to drive me straight to the hospital and have me on psych hold. She didn't have any explanation to calm me down, and we didn't laugh. I ended up telling her I must have fallen asleep and had a nightmare. She didn't ask how I'd ended up on the side of the street in the middle of nowhere. I didn't point it out. I don't know what happened that night on that bus. If anyone has any idea, please let me know. I'm still trying to figure it out. In all the research I've done, I've never heard of anything like this. For a few years I convinced myself that I'd had a psychotic breakdown, but after finding this sub, I'm convinced that it all happened exactly as I remember it. All I know is that I'll never set foot on a bus again.